House Stark has ruled the North for countless years, and for most of that time, their rule has been unquestioned. Their dominance has been such that it would be difficult for any other house to have issued a real challenge, no matter which of these countless years or centuries we're even referring to, because it's been so long and so well kept. It's difficult to imagine a circumstance where another northern house could have enough support to overcome Winterfell and its allies. Even now, in A Song of Ice and Fire, with the Boltons holding the castle, there's a sense that this is temporary. I don't know many people who think that the Starks aren't going to get Winterfell back. The question is how. The how is what makes it interesting, but the end result, as far as that goes, is very few people seem to question that. The time for wolves is coming again at some point. The conditions that allowed Roose Bolton to make his move were highly unusual, though. Roose himself began as an ally. He didn't start off plotting against Robb Stark, or if he did, he knew it would require a lot of things going his way before the opportunity would present itself. The opportunity did present itself, and he was part of creating the opportunity, but it was a lot of it was outside of him. Right? It took things like Lysa's lie through Littlefinger about Jon Arryn, the near death of Bran, and then the follow-up assassination attempt with the cat's paw dagger. So two near deaths for Bran there. The news of Daenerys' marriage to Khal Drogo and ensuing pregnancy. And there's just so many things, right? Like, I don't have to list them all. You guys know. I just threw a few of them out there just to grease the wheels a little bit. So many factors lined up to make Winterfell fall. And even then, it took an expert plotter with extreme ambitions, and he didn't, face them in open battle. It was still subterfuge and intrigue and backstabbing. It wasn't like, my army faces yours now, and I'm going to beat you. No, the Boltons never had that. It was, the Red Wedding and such like that. So, somewhere in the realm of a century ago, however, Winterfell was in another period of relative weakness. And while many northern houses remained loyal as they do now, others saw an opportunity. Dark clouds formed on the horizon after the death of Cregan Stark, the Old Man of the North, and his descendants faced a host of challenges and a host of Stoneborn. That's right, the Skagosi. There was uncertainty about the succession after Cregan multiple times, multiple different heirs. There were issues, there were problems, internal problems. There were strange marriages that reflect these problems, like vaguely Targaryen, if not more than vaguely Targaryen. And you know what I mean when I say that. Yes, incestuous. Entangling alliances on top of that with other northern houses and lots of lords of Winterfell who didn't hold the title for very long. We got Lord of Winterfell for 2 years, Lord of Winterfell for 3 years, there's really short stints after Cregan ruled for something like 50 years, maybe? We don't exactly know, but a long, long time. So for a time then, Winterfell's lack of reach was simply spoken of. People said, Winterfell's weaker. It wasn't a Bolton situation where they lost it and had to get it back. But it was a ticking time bomb. And eventually it turned to blood. Winterfell's weakness was capitalized on, and someone tested them, tested the Starks to see if the direwolf was still a creature to be feared. And it was Cregan's fourth son, Barthogan, Barth, who held the lordship of Winterfell when the tide finally turned. When Skagos, a place even hardened northerners fear, went rebel. Lord Barth Blackword, he was called. He had a couple of different nicknames, I guess. And today we will tell his tale as best as we can. For example, what's up with that super badass, maybe villainous sounding name? The moniker Blacksword by itself is like, what's that now? Blacksword, you say. Interesting. So we've got unicorn cavalry, warriors who eat the hearts of their defeated foes and hang the rest of the entrails from heart trees, shipwrecks and raids and ambushes, false lights and foreshadowing for Davos and Rickon and others. We've got Manderleys and Umbers and Giant's Blood and, of course, lots of Starks. We might even have the only known example of ice being wielded in battle, meaning the Valyrian steel blade, of course, not, frozen water being wielded in battle. All that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome back, everyone. It's time for another episode, another deep dive into the past. Not too far into the past, though, as I said at the beginning. This is an era that's only about 100 to 150 years before. Some of the timeline's a little bit uncertain, but that's part of the fun. We're here every Sunday, just about, not quite every Sunday, but almost every Sunday for these live streams. But if you can't catch the live stream, you can always catch the edited version, a little tightened up, a little better sound quality. Ashea does all that good stuff. You can find the edited video version up on Spotify or the edited podcast version anywhere you find podcasts. And if you listen on Patreon, it's ad-free. Shout out to our great friend Nina, goodqueenally.tumblr.com. That's good queen ALY, one Y in alley. And her latest blog post is on the Tyrells and what their plans were with Sansa. Obviously, we know that they wanted Sansa to marry Willis. But what was next? What was their plan beyond getting Sansa into their family? What would have been the next step? So that's a good read, a good question from the person that asked it. I don't know who they were, but Nina gives a good answer. If you have questions for us, hit us up at westeroshistory@gmail.com, or if you're watching live, go ahead and drop a question in the chat, or meet us on our Discord, hit us up on Blue Sky, Facebook. We're on most of the social media platforms. Shout out to Chatty Lumpkin, who sent a very large super chat here, 200 Canadian, which they said, this is 139 USD. I checked. That's 139. What? Nothing.
I checked.
You checked. Oh, Ashea checked. Ashea checked, not Chatty Lumpkin. Right on. Well, thank you, Chatty. That's very appreciated. That's very generous. And they say, thanks for all the hard work. Well, we'll keep them coming. We'll keep the episodes running. And we love doing this. So, yeah, you can count on us to keep it going. We'll start with our trivia question, as we so often do. Who said this line? Only heart trees ever see half of what they do on Skagos. Who said that line? I will mention it during the episode, and we'll reveal the answer at the end. Good luck to you if you're guessing. So here's what we have in store today. I'm going to read you the little section headers, the different parts of this episode. I love to give them titles. Can you believe that I used to always give these things titles and not read them? I made up creative titles for each section, and like a good third of the episodes, it was like just for me, I guess, and Ashea. Like I wasn't reading them. Like, why don't I read these? Some of these are kind of fun. Anyway, so we've got our intro and setup. Then we have why Blacksword, and then why unmarried. Yeah, Barth Blackword was unmarried, which is very odd, and we'll explain why that's odd. And well, it's odder than you might think. Yes, it's already unusual that a Lord of Winterfell or any great house didn't get married, but it's even weirder than that. Then we're going to go through some of the timeline around this era. It's such an interesting era. There's so many interesting characters, so much intrigue, so much mystery. But what we do know gives us a lot to work with, and that'll set a lot of our context and a lot of the setting. Then we'll talk about the legacy of Cregan Stark. This section's called The Old Man's Legacy, Cregan's Descendants. I'll alternate calling him Cregan and Cregan because that's how I am. The wolf must have one head. Yes, that is a play on the dragon must have three heads, but as you might guess, that is referring to too many Stark branches, just like there might be too many Targaryen branches. Barthogan's inheritance will start the second half, so Blacksword taking over as Lord of Winterfell. Then the Skagosi Rebellion. We'll break that down in great detail as much as we can. The war beginning, the Blacksword falls, and then finishing the war and looking forward. And then a little outro where we talk a little bit about Davos and Rickon and how this will set up their storyline a bit. Or at least could. Yeah, so we're dealing with a thin slice here. A thin slice from an era with a lot of missing details. And we've covered Cregan before, and that was a little easier because while there's a lot we're missing on him, there's a lot we do have. Now, it is fair to say that what we do have is fascinating, and it's also fair to say that there's vast swaths of Northern history not given to us. I mean, there's thousands of years of Northern history, and we don't know most of it. But of the ones we do know, this one really stands out. And in part, it's because it's not that long ago from the perspective of A Song of Ice and Fire, right? I mean, my best guess is Barth was born around 164 AC, which means during the reign of Baelor the Blessed, not long after the death of Daeron the and his failed conquest of Dorne. Roughly in that era, Elio Garcia, who helped write the World of Ice and Fire, they have their multi-user game. I think it's on hiatus right now, but they ran that in the same era. So they had done some guesswork on some of these dates as well. So occasionally I'll refer to what their guesses were. And occasionally in their case, they actually know the right dates. But so much of the mush predates Fire and Blood, and as well as the World of Ice and Fire even. So some of it doesn't quite line up. Anyway, disclaimer over. Barth probably died in the early 200s, and that's a near certainty because he died during the reign of King Daeron II. So that's at least somewhat refined to a certain region of time. Now, the prologue of A Game of Thrones is early 298 or late 297. So what we'll see is a couple examples where someone's like, about a century ago, blah, blah, blah happened. So you can see it's probably more like 90 years, but whatever. That's nothing. 10 years is nothing when you're throwing around centuries. And of course, that era, the early 200s, that's when Dunk and Egg were coming up. Like, literally, they were boys turning into adults around that time. The Hedge Knight takes place in 209, early 209, mid 209 maybe. And Egg becomes king 24 years later and acquires the nickname Aegon the Unlikely. Aegon the Fifth, right? And that is a good parallel for us to start with Barth, because Aegon the Unlikely was the fourth son of a fourth son. And there's some Barth Blackword the Unlikely going on here too. He was also a fourth son. He wasn't the fourth son of a fourth son, but he was the ninth child, which is, yeah, you inherit after being the ninth child? That is unlikely. I think it's fair to say. Now, he wasn't the fourth son of a fourth son. He was the fourth son of a first son, but it was from his third wife. So you can see that is really far down the line. And yeah, it's unlikely, but unlikely is kind of a soft term to use here because of the unspoken truth that has to be present when you inherit over so many elder siblings. And that truth is that they must have all died. That's not good. That's not a thing you want hanging over you. Yeah, I'm the Lord of Winterfell, but I am the Lord of Winterfell because all my brothers and maybe even some of my sisters died, ahead of me. That means they didn't get to live full lives. Barth didn't live a full life, so the Starks he inherited from most likely didn't either. Even if we have a much shorter range for what a full life is in Westeros, right? So things like tragedy, sadness, survivor's guilt. Like, why am I the one left? Why did I survive and all my brothers have died, or all my sisters and brothers have died? It's a little trickier because of inheritance and all that. But still, there might still be some guilt there, and maybe their children could have had a shot at inheriting. And, well, why him? Why Barth Blackword? Or why one of these other characters? And one of the reasons this comes to mind is because it's an absolutely fundamental, early introduced character trait of none other than Ned Stark himself. Quote,
"I was only 12 when my father promised me to your brother, Brandon." That brought a bitter twist to Ned's mouth.
Brandon, yes. Brandon would know what to do. He always did. It was all meant for Brandon. You, Winterfell, everything. He was born to be a king's hand and a father to queens. I never asked for this cup to pass to me.
Perhaps not, Catelyn said, but Brandon is dead, and the cup has passed, and you must drink from it, like it or not.
Notice how early this is in terms of establishing character. Like I said, this is very fundamental to Ned. This is Catelyn 2, A Game of Thrones, one of the first chapters in the entire book, the entire series. But of course, we can't assume this is how Barth Blackword or any other Stark would be. It's just a possibility. And that's a thing that you have to do when you're imagining a character who you don't know a lot about. A lot of you who play role-playing games, you play D&D or online games, Baldur's Gate, any sort of thing like that. If you like to role-play your character and you want to do it in a convincing, authentic way, you have to imagine all the different stimuli and events and things that your character or other characters would live through, and then try to honestly decide how they would react. And that's what an author has to do with a huge cast of characters. So we have to be open to a lot of possibilities here. So maybe Barth Blackword just didn't like his siblings. Maybe he was one of those types of people. Even when you have 8 elder siblings, you'd think that maybe one of those would work out. Like you'd like one of them or get along with 1 or 2 of them. But not necessarily, right? You can't make that assumption. So maybe Barth Blackword wasn't a very likable guy. Maybe he didn't get along with his siblings very well. Maybe they didn't like him. You know, maybe it was a two-way street. Neither of them liked the other. And if we're going a step farther, some people are willing to kill their siblings for power, right? Or for other reasons. So Euron, right? That's a good example. Some people are just born off, right? Euron, for example, right? Some of them are tempted by power. Euron, again, right? But if we use non-Greyjoy examples, I'm sure that even amongst the Starks, there had to be some who weren't just perfect angels. And Ned Stark's not a perfect angel, so like even he isn't. But he is a good man overall. He cares, he has sympathy, he has self-reflection and things like that we value. So these are possibilities for Barth Blackword, and we can only look at the circumstances of his life and the details from a high level to maybe make these guesses and theorize, and that's fun. There's a lot we can glean and triangulate and extrapolate and infer, and lots of synonyms are available to us for things like this. In fact, it is what we've learned doing exactly that which brings us to this episode in the first place. Well, that and patron voting, of course. That's one of the reasons we're doing this particular episode. But even with so much missing, even with so much of Barth's personality missing and so much of this timeline missing, it really stands out. And, well, keep listening and you'll see why. So let's start with why he was called Blacksword. What I'm going to do here is we're going to look at the character as best as we can and then look at the timeline and interpret the events that flow through here, that the events that transpire. And given our read on Barth's character, we can kind of understand or at least make reasonable guesses as to how he might have reacted to those things or how those things might have affected him and the rest of the Starks and the rest of the North. So one of the first guesses we have is why he was called Barth Blackword is that he wielded ice in battle. We know for a certainty that ice was not a sword wielded in battle very often. But it's hard to believe that it was never wielded in battle, right? It's not heavy because it's Valyrian steel. It's just really long, and that makes it difficult to fight with. It's more ceremonial that way. Someone like Ned would prefer a smaller sword. It's just more appropriate for how tall he is and just how he was trained. He probably didn't grow up learning how to fight with it even because, well, why would he? He wasn't going to fight with it later. But what if you're born really tall? What if you're Sandor Clegane sized or even Gregor Clegane sized? Well, maybe not that big. That's really unusual. But you don't have to be Gregor Clegane sized to use a two-handed greatsword, although you do to wield it one-handed like he does. Still, we're not imagining something that large, although I guess we could if we wanted to. But the point is we don't need that exceptional of a person size-wise to wield ice. We just need someone very big, not insanely unrealistically big. And let's think about what it looks like. Valyrian steel is almost black. It's dark, smoky gray, right? So from a distance, it would probably look black. And if you didn't know better, which most people in Westeros don't, you see the sword from a distance. You've never seen anything like it, probably. Maybe you never will again, especially if you're a peasant or some lesser lord. Maybe if you're a more prominent lord, you might see Valyrian steel elsewhere. But a lot of these lesser lords would never even leave the north. Ice might be the only Valyrian steel blade they ever see, and again, they may only see it from a distance. So it would look black, right? It would be unique and dark, and yeah. So if he did wield it in battle, then it would be seen a lot more. It wouldn't just be seen when it's unsheathed to cut someone's head off. Because that would be the only time you would pretty much ever see it outside of the sheath. Like, what point is there to having it unsheathed if it's just used as a symbol of authority for doing justice, which is the business of the ruler. The Lord of Winterfell is the one who dispenses justice. Ice is the symbol of that justice. What an interesting thing for that symbol of justice to be used in battle against a foe that has behaved unjustly, that has broken the laws or broken rules or is considered treasonous. That's kind of symbolic in its own fun way. Nina adds, and this would be a rare opportunity for a Stark Lord to even fight in battle. Yeah, that's a great point, because even if there were prior Starks who were big enough to wield it in battle, they might not have had a battle to wield it in. We just got through saying at the beginning of the episode how very long swaths of these many, many centuries that House Stark has been in charge, they didn't have threats. As best as we can tell, they had the North on lockdown. No one's going to stand up to the Starks. You're just going to lose. Right? Now, that said, we see rebellions and wars started that look kind of dumb. Like, why did you ever think you had a chance? Fiction and the real world, right? So you got to throw in some examples every once in a while. But if these are bad ideas, then that means the Starks probably didn't have that much problem with them, which means they, again, limited opportunity to use ice in battle, even if you are the rare Stark capable of doing so. I mean, compare the sword to Dawn. Dawn's a great example. Dawn's also a great sword. It's not Valyrian steel, but as far as we know, it has very similar properties. Weight, length, nothing that should make it any different to wield in battle than ice, unless ice is longer, which it could be. But I don't think it is. I think they're roughly the same length. They're both great swords. We don't hear that ice is a particularly big great sword. It's just great swords are big. They're not for regular sized people usually. They are for larger people, generally speaking. There are exceptions, of course. Arthur Dayne was a large man. Jaime thought of him as stronger than him, and Jaime's not huge, but Jaime's like 6 foot, which is very big, 6'1". That's very large for Westeros, and it's well above average for, Western males in the year 2025 as well. I think the average height for Western males is something like 5'8", 5'9", maybe. So yeah, these are large people we're talking about. For example, Rickon Stark, as in the son of Cregan, his first son, the one who was heir to Winterfell for a long time. He died in Dorne. Right, died during Daeron's conquest of Dorne, near the end. He wasn't Lord Stark, but that's an example of someone who could have theoretically wielded ice in battle if he were the right size to. I doubt he was. But it doesn't have to be the Lord Stark who wields it either. There's potentially the heir can as well. Kind of like Dark Sister is sometimes wielded by a prince of House Targaryen. And occasionally even Blackfire was. If that's the person who's going to inherit. Like Baelor Breakspear, we're pretty sure wielded Blackfire before he inherited. Well, he never inherited. He died before he inherited. But so if he ever wielded Blackfire, it was ahead of time. But he couldn't have really, because that was given to Daemon. But the point stands. In theory, given though the inheritors can wield the sword, it doesn't have to only be wielded by the Lord. There are exceptions. Now, another reason, Black Sword. He wasn't married, which is something we'll talk about in a little more detail later, but in line with not being married. Maybe he was planning on joining the Night's Watch. Again, 9th child, 4th son, farther down the line than Benjen, right? Plenty of Starks joined the Night's Watch, so maybe that was what he was planning on doing, but then stuff happened, his brother dies, his father dies, all these things, and he's like, well, maybe I shouldn't go running off and join the Night's Watch. The problem with this theory is that if he had joined the Night's Watch, he would have done it as a young man. And we're pretty sure he didn't die as too young of a man. We're pretty sure he lived to be over 30 or around 30. So there are some flaws with that idea. But of course, you can see why I would say Black Sword, Night's Watch, Black Brother, right? I don't know. It's a little bit of a stretch, but we're trying to come up with some ideas here. And that would also help explain why he wasn't married, by the way. If he was planning on joining the Night's Watch, well, you're not going to get married if that's your goal. So that at least fits quite well. What about temperament? Like a black mood, black humor, a guy that's just always down. Like he doesn't have the blues, he has the blacks? What does that mean? We hear that term thrown around a lot, though. Like that color is associated with negativity for emotions, right? Even though the opposite isn't. You don't say white mood. Right? I don't know. Anyway, that's got nothing to do with anything. I'm just thinking about semantics briefly here. So he was in a black mood, and not just because a few street urchins wanted to pelt him with dung, right? That's a line. Another line we have. This is a poison that I hold, she thought. I ought to burn it. Instead, she cracked the seal. A scrap of leather fluttered down into her lap. When she read the dry brown words, her black mood grew blacker still. Dark wings, dark words. That is Asha receiving the skin of Theon in a letter. That's what the little cracked scrap of leather was. So, yeah. Or Nina suggests Blackwalder Frey. He is named Blackwalder Frey for his bad temper. He's also violent. His temper makes him violent. He's also ambitious and has murdered some of his own family. So that's associated with it too. Yeah. Maybe that's what we're dealing with here. Maybe Barth Blacksword was a Blackwalder Frey type figure who was seen as an enemy amongst his own family, or a dangerous individual who that's why he didn't have friends or a wife or what have you. And maybe he was downright villainous, which that probably does apply to Blackwalder Frey as well. It's hard to call him a villain when he's murdering Freys. No, he is. He's pretty villainous. Kinslaying's rough business, man. So maybe he actually usurped Winterfell from his nephew or his brother. Probably not, but there is enough room for theories like this. Well enough room for theories like this to work. The problem with it is if he kills his own brother, like the Northerner who kills their own brother, that's, especially a Stark, you're going to lose some support. And if there's another Stark faction, it seems like that Stark faction would benefit greatly from a competing Stark faction being guilty of kinslaying, right? So I don't know. That one might be going too far, but it's absolutely, again, worth considering. These are all valid theories for a character in this timeline with a nickname like this. Nina also adds, look about the quote from Sir Illifer, the Black Bat of Loston. We did a recent episode on House Loston. He said, black is the deeds of them that bore it, including Manfred of the Black Hood. Yeah, so there's a simplicity here, but it's consistent in Westeros with seeing dark colors associated with villainy. There's a segue, or that's a segue to this question we've been dancing around, which is why wasn't he ever married? Let's talk about why it's so unusual that he wasn't married. Beyond the fact that most lords get married. That's all right by itself. That's unusual, right? So to start off, it's unusual because he had two older brothers, Jonel, who became known as Jonel One-Eye, and Edric, who didn't have a nickname, and then a younger brother named Brandon, because, well, you can only go so long in a Stark family without getting another Brandon in there. In fact, that Brandon is who all the current Starks descend from, right? Figures, right? So, but all those other three brothers got married. Brandon, like I said, all the current Starks descend through him, so he clearly got married, and he got married to a Karstark, an Alice Karstark, in fact. And meanwhile, Jonel married his own sister, his own half-sister, his niece, my bad, his brother's daughter, his older brother Rickon's daughter he married, and Edric married his other daughter, his other half-brother's daughter. So Rickon had to, let me say that again, that was a little confusing. Yeah. Rickon, first son of Cregan, had two daughters, Serena and Sansa. There's some confusion in the wiki and some of the literature that George is in his notes about which one of them was elder. We're going with Sansa being the elder, with Sansa being the elder here, but it's possible their names are flipped. It doesn't make a huge amount of difference to the way we're going to tell the story. Just throw that out there as a possible note on how this was designed. So it's weird, right? You have Barth's elder brothers marrying the two daughters of their other elder brother, half-brother, and then Brandon, his younger brother, marries a Karstark, but he doesn't get married at all? What's up with that? It seems like they were trying to create plenty of Starks, trying to make marriages to have more Starks and to make more alliances, but this guy didn't get married at all. And some of them got married twice. Jonel One-Eye got married twice. And Brandon had a bastard. Before he got married to Alice Karstark, he had a bastard son named Lonel Snow. So there were kids popping up all over the place, marriages, relationships, alliances, but somehow Barth was not involved in any of it. What's up with that? This definitely comes back to some of the stuff we were saying about the nickname and how that might indicate a darker personality. This man may have been unsuitable to marriage because he was too violent. Maybe this was like a Maegor type guy, and you're like, what good would it be to marry this boy to a girl from another noble house with the intent of it being an alliance, if he's going to mistreat her so badly that it turns a potential alliance into an enemy, like what Ramsay is doing to Jane Poole, who everybody thinks is Arya, right? Lady Dustin's like, yo, they like Arya. They love Arya. And they think that's Arya. That's the unspoken part, of course. They hear her screaming and crying. That's not going to make them like the Boltons. In fact, that's going to do the opposite. You're like, you've got this marriage alliance, but you're turning it into an enemy instead of relying on them for support. So even marriage alliances can become the opposite in such a case. So maybe that was the concern. Like, don't marry this guy to anyone. He's going to make that house hate us. He's going to mistreat whatever daughter they send, and that won't help us build an alliance. Again, just one of many possibilities, but it's hard to come up with good reasons. Like, yeah, okay, maybe he was just gay, right? That's an easy go-to. Like, but again, that doesn't settle it. That doesn't solve it. He might still get married to try to father children, to father heirs, even if he's not into women. And he might not have a say in it. His father would make the arrangements. He's like, Dad, he's not going to tell Cregan Stark that he doesn't like girls. This is not a society that works that way. So either maybe his father figured that out and just unspoken, like he doesn't like women. We're just going to not talk about this and not make him get married. But I don't think it's something you can look at and be like, oh, well, that must be it. He didn't like women because it wasn't all in his control. It's not all his agency. Same with like a Renly or maybe even a Brynden Blackfish. Now, Blackfish didn't get married, but we can't assume he didn't get married because of his sexuality. It's a very strong possibility, but there is no way we can be like, oh, definitely Brynden Blackfish was gay. No, it's a strong possibility, but we can't be certain. It's very much in play here. Very much in play. He also could have been planning to get married later. He could have been like, well, I'm waiting for a certain house to have a child. I want to, maybe this guy is dying and I want to marry this widow, something like that. He had a plan. He had a house he wanted to get married into, and the opportunity just never came up. So maybe he planned on getting married later and it just didn't happen, and then he was killed, and well, then it became a moot point. After all, Daeron the young dragon, he went off to conquer Dorne before getting married. He very likely would have eventually gotten married, but because he never did, people say, well, maybe he wasn't into girls also. That's also possible, yeah. But again, he very possibly would have tried to father children anyway because of dynastic concerns. So these things are tricky, very tricky. You can't make assumptions, but we can cast a wide net. We can present a range of options, and with that range of options, we can see these possibilities bloom, and our imaginations are they're tickled, they're inspired, they're given a good run through here. Let's talk about the timeline, the setting, and the era. What kind of a time and place Blacksword was born into, what the North was like in this era. Some of this is a little bit familiar, but some of it's a little different because I have some different takes on some of these dates. Thin slicing this era, like I said at the beginning, has given me a different take on a lot of the dates for some of these children, for some of these Starks that came after Cregan. All right, so Cregan was born in 108. His young wife, Aranori, died 20 years later, giving birth to Rickon. Rickon was growing up, was a young boy when Cregan remarried at the end of the Dance of the Dragons to, of course, Black Aly Blackwood. In the year 130, roughly to the year 140, sometime around that range, would have been when Cregan and Black Aly had their 4 daughters, Sarah, Alice, Rhea, and Mariah. Now, probably sometime in the 140s, maybe early 140s, maybe mid 140s, maybe even later, but definitely before the conquest of Dorne in 157, Black Aly would have died. So well before her time. Like she was 16-ish when the dance broke out. So we're talking, probably she might not have made it to her mid 30s. So that's tragic, most likely. Certainly not a good thing, right? So Cregan would have been deeply impacted by that, assuming their marriage went as well as the beginning of their relationship seemed to have gone. Certainly having 4 daughters implies their relationship was going pretty well. They were certainly sharing each other's bed frequently, at least. You can imply that, at least at the beginning. So around maybe the same time, maybe a little later or roughly around the same time, Rickon would have married Jane Manderley, right? And there would have been pressure for them to have kids because Rickon's the heir, and there's no other boys. There's no other heirs. There's girls, which now this is a funky conversation to have about women inheriting in Winterfell. We all here agree that a woman should be capable of ruling Winterfell. I think most of us agree on that anyway. And we may even see it by the end of the series. It may be Sansa who's in charge at the end. That may be where we end. That streak may finally be broken. But here's a guy, Cregan, who's just saw the Dance of the Dragons play out. He might have seen Rhaenyra as capable. He backed her. He backed Jace, her son. He was ready for it. He's like, yeah, we took our oath. We're following through with it. But what actually happened was a whole half of the realm was like, no, we don't want a woman to rule. That's not really why they rose up. They rose up because they wanted to be on the side of the Greens, and the Greens were using woman as an excuse to take the throne. It was about power. That's the real bottom line here. But that's not what most people saw it as. The cover story was we can't have a woman ruler, or we can't have bastards inherit the throne after. All these reasons, right? But the bottom line is it's all about power. So the same thing is happening in the North. Cregan's like, I could have one of my daughters inherit Winterfell. I know she's capable, or maybe he doesn't. But let's say he did. They were raised by Black Aly, so maybe they were, at least one of these 4 daughters was like, had her gumption, her toughness, her strength, her bravery, her ability to exist in a man's world of power and hold her own. But if she wasn't around to imbue that in her daughters, or none of them were cut from the same cloth, then that's a problem. It's like, well, theoretically, Cregan's fine with the idea of a woman ruling Winterfell, but not maybe one of these particular 4 women. Maybe they weren't cut from that cloth. They weren't Lady of Winterfell material like a Sansa or a Black Aly. Or he just like, this is just too much trouble. I think they're capable. I think one of them's capable, but the North is not going to accept it. And I'm not about to just have another war. Better to just have a son and avoid all that nonsense in the first place. Yeah, we should have women in charge, but maybe we just can't afford to have a war over it. Either way, the pressure is there to have kids. I mean, you're the heir to Winterfell. You're going to want to have kids regardless. So there's double pressure on Rickon and Jane Manderley to have kids. In the early to mid 150s, so we're not quite to the conquest of Dorne yet, but we're a few years before it. We're still in the reign of Aegon III. Sansa and Serena are born to Rickon and Jane. No boys, 2 girls. In 157, Rickon, presumably with a bunch of other northern kids his age, think of Brandon going off with his companions. Rickon isn't going to go fight in a war in Dorne without a bunch of other nobles from the north his age in his contingent, in his retinue, right? Maybe some of them died too. But he definitely died in Sunspear near the end of the war, or near the end of the first part of the war. So there's no male heir to Winterfell now. We've got Sansa as the heir presumptive. A boy could still be born to Cregan now. Only if he remarries, which apparently he did. Well, he definitely did. I'm saying the apparently he did right around this time. He probably married almost immediately after the death of Rickon because the problem would be staring him in the face. Either I allow one of these women to inherit and face the possible issues of the North rejecting her, let alone she may not be capable, or remarry, try to have a son, and pass the crown of the throne of Winterfell, the seat of Winterfell, to this unborn child. That is apparently what he decided to do, to remarry and try to have more sons. What he did was marry someone named Lyanna Stark. Another Stark, so it sounds like incest. It's actually not that incestuous, even though she was a Stark. Lyanna Stark descended from Brandon the Boisterous. Brandon the Boisterous was the son who inherited from Torrhen Stark. So this branch broke apart like 160 years before. So you have to go back like 160, 150 years to find a common ancestor between Lyanna Stark and Cregan Stark. So that's actually quite That's not incestuous. They have the same last name, but that's far enough for me in the past. No conjoined bloodlines for over 150 years. That's good enough for me. I wouldn't call that incest. Nina has a very interesting theory here that it's something like a Viserys the First Alicent scenario, where you have a sad widower, in his case, a twice widower, who has an uncertain succession situation going on. Even maybe he doesn't see it as so uncertain, but maybe he does. Viserys didn't. Maybe he should have. And Cregan seems to have had a type. Aranori was a hill clansman, a daughter. So she was probably pretty tough. Probably certainly not a woman of dresses in court, as from what we could gather from that upbringing. Alysanne Blackwood, Black Alley, also not. She's a warrior woman, an archer, a battler, a campaigner, a fighter. So yeah, not a courtly woman either, in terms of that. So maybe this is what Lenara was, or maybe she was the alternative that he had never had a relationship with. Either way, the fact that she was a Stark is telling in the terms of establishing a new Stark branch. That's very Stark, right? And he may have been feeling a little bit like Robb Stark. He was so distraught in the loss of Rickon that he looked to someone else for comfort, and Lenara was there. This cousin who was already, say, had a job at Winterfell. She was part of his court. You know, it's pretty easy to imagine that being the case, just like it was with Alicent. And yeah, Jane Westerling comforted Robb after he found out about what happened to Winterfell and the news that Bran and Rickon were killed. Obviously, that's not what happened, but he heard about it, and he had no reason to doubt it at the time. So yeah, maybe Cregan was suffering here. He's lost his son. He's worried about the future of the North, and here's Lenara Stark, presumably a lot younger than him, because if the goal is to have children, well, you're probably not going to marry someone whose childbearing years are sunsetting. So yeah, she's probably a lot younger, and especially the evidence given how many children they did have, which is several, 5 actually. Yeah, that also implies that she was a bit on the younger end. So that's what happens. He gets married to Lenara Stark, and they just start having children. It's like the opposite of the problem they had before. They're like, are we ever going to have a son? All of a sudden, they have a bunch of sons. So roughly around the late 150s, early 160s, Jonel was born. Then Edric. Then Serena was betrothed or married to Lord John Umber around this time. Now, you were like, wait, Aziz, you said Serena got married to Edric. Yes, but not right away. First, she married John Umber. Then in the 161, the young dragon died in Dorne at the Parley, right? And soon after, based on our guess, their sister Lyanna was born. So we have Jonel, Edric, and now Lyanna. And then roughly 2 years later, Barthogan, our subject, Barth Blackword rather, is born. And then maybe another year or two later, Brandon is born. Now, we said at the beginning that Aegon III was close to Cregan, and that proximity, that relationship gave a lot of benefits to House Stark. We don't know what any of those benefits were, but I'm pretty sure that's gone by this point. I'm pretty sure that closeness to House Targaryen has fallen off. Aegon III's dead. His heirs weren't ruling the throne at all the way he was. He might feel a little bitterness after what Daeron took his son and got him killed in Dorne. And then the next ruler is Baelor, the Blessed, who we had several episodes about him now, 3 of them out. Shout out Nina for all her work on that. Baelor's only interest in the North that we know of was negative. He had negative interest in the North. He didn't like the old gods. He didn't like the way they worship. So that's not going to make Cregan feel any better. That's not going to make their relationship stronger. So not only is there reason to think that this had expired through reasons of time passing, but there's active negativity coming from the Iron Throne towards the North. In the early mid-170s, this is when it gets really weird. This is when the marriages start to get strange. And this is when the theories get interesting too, because to explain these things, I don't mean weird like it doesn't make sense. I mean like stuff must have been really going on here to make these decisions happen. What was going on? Jonel married Sansa. Okay, this is a uniting of the two branches. Rickon's elder daughter and eldest child and his next oldest brother. Or if you're looking at it from Cregan's perspective, who probably arranged this marriage because he was probably still alive. He was marrying his granddaughter through his first wife to his son through his third wife. Say that again. Cregan arranged the marriage of his granddaughter through his first wife to his son through his third wife. Yeah. That's not very Stark-like, is it? When else have we seen Starks get married with that much consanguinity? Consanguinity? Rickard Stark, father of Ned and Brandon and Lyanna and Benjen, married his first cousin, Liara, right? That's the closest one we know of. Now, again, we've said how many thousands of years of Stark history we just don't have a single iota of information on. So it's possible the Starks have a higher threshold for what counts as incest than we thought. That might be what's going on here a little bit. But still, this is still the most extreme example we have, and I'm not just going to set that aside and be like, meh, that probably doesn't mean anything. No, I think it means something. I think they were trying to prevent problems from happening, and maybe even prevent some current problems from developing even farther. I think there's a lot of forethought in these, but it's difficult to figure out exactly what they were trying to worry about and what alliances they were shoring up, things like that. Well, we will continue to bring up some theories, though, throughout the episode. Then in the year 170, here's something very interesting happened. It was a great melee at Last Hearth, which is, of course, the seat of House Umber. And here's what happened. Quote,
Northmen fight a horse with war lances, but seldom tilt for sport, preferring melees that are only just this side of battles. There are accounts of contests that have lasted half a day and left fields trampled and villages half torn down. Serious injuries are common in such a melee, and deaths are not unheard of. In the Great Melee at Last Hearth in 170 AC, it is said that no fewer than 18 men died, and half again that number were sorely maimed before the day was done.
That type of result has maker of blood feuds written all over it. In blood, right? Which means conflicts, which means potentially generational conflicts, things that last for the lives of multiple family members, maybe 20, 40, 60, 80 years. These kind of stories. So this is potential context, if not outright setup, for the sort of factionalism in the North, even at Winterfell, present in this post-Cregan Stark era. Nina says, think about the tournament in 206 AC in King's Landing when Otho Bracken murdered Quentyn Blackwood, presumably using the pretext of tourney violence. Like the guy bashed his skull in. And he's like, yeah, what could I do? It's a tournament. All's fair in tournaments, right? Yeah, even though you're bludgeoning this man's skull in. Yeah, no, it's all in the... Yeah, so these are things that we've seen before. Look what Gregor did. And people use tournament violence as an excuse for real violence. It was literally a plot point in early Game of Thrones, trying to trick Robert through reverse psychology into entering the melee so that someone could kill him and be like, oh, I don't know, who did it? We don't know. This is a sudden, a sword swing, errant hit him, who knows? You can't blame anyone for that. So yeah, it's an abattoir, right? So this is Blackwood Bracken, this example that Nina gives. So it's really hard to believe that it was an accident, right? He may have even entered the tournament specifically to kill this man. He's like, Otho Bracken's like, I'm going to enter the tournament and kill Quentyn Blackwood. That's my purpose here. That was his need. That was the reason he did it. What about the tournament held for Rhaenyra and Laenor? When Kristen Cole just took it all out on Joffrey Lonmouth, just beat the guy to death, basically. Right? I mean, we all know what really happened there. He was mad. I mean, he used the tournament as an excuse to extract violent revenge. It's interesting to speculate whether this Grand Melee in 170 was organized by Serena Stark, married to Lord Jon in this era. They might have held this tournament with the explicit reason of getting rid of some of the excess Starks. And this comes back to, again, Cersei and the turning of the hand and maybe offing Robert in a sneaky method that no one would be able to trace to her, or at least they wouldn't be able to pin on her. They might suspect it, but there wouldn't be any way to prove it. So a case like this, these melees are more violent than tournaments. It would be easier to pull something like this off in this setting than it would be in a regular tournament, because it's more normal for this level of violence. So we got 18 men killed, and you don't have a lot of regular rank and file folk entering these tournaments. These are like the scions of noble houses are the ones who enter these things. It's the big prominent folk, the ones that can afford a full set of armor and horses and all the stuff you need. There's not a lot of free riders entering these types of events. So it is very much a setup for potential sneaky murders. And this Lady Serena is somebody we're going to keep in mind as someone that might have made moves, might have felt like, hey, I was cheated out of my inheritance. I should be the Lady of Winterfell. I'm the firstborn, or I'm descendant of the heir to Winterfell, Rickon Stark, and it shouldn't have passed over me. This is how Cersei's are made. People who are cheated out of power based on silly things like gender. So this also could have been where Jon Umber died. Jon Umber never actually had children with Serena, which is part of the reason she remarries, and it's a little simpler than it could have been, because then she has having children with two different houses, that can get a little entangling. But anyway, they didn't have kids, and maybe he was the victim of this. Maybe he was killed during this melee by someone that wanted her detached from that marriage, or just someone that didn't like Lord Jon Umber. This could be an attempt even by Edric, Jonel's younger brother, to kill Serena's husband and seize her claim, right? Because eventually Edric is going to marry her and have a bunch of children with her that Lord Jon Umber never did. So you can see how these machinations, how these gears are ticking. We don't think Barth was old enough to fight in this great melee. But if he was, if our timeline is off by enough and he did fight in it, then it's potentially where he earned the nickname. Kind of Barristan the Bold got the Bold when he was 10, right? So you can get these nicknames pretty young. Not most people don't get those nicknames so young, but it can happen. And a good example of an unfurl here, that melee, yeah, how often do these things happen? When do we have other examples of a great melee? Nowhere. The answer is nowhere. We have no other examples of these things. Apparently they happen, but we have no other specific examples. And it doesn't sound like they're terribly common. So that makes it stand out even more, that this event was organized around the time of a lot of these troubles and may have been part of the troubles itself. Kind of a underhanded way to get rid of some people. So it might be on the way out as a tradition. Can you imagine Ned Stark agreeing to something like that? I mean, he might not stop it, but he certainly wouldn't hold it himself. He wouldn't be like, yeah, let's have a great melee where people kill each other. That sounds great. Sounds like a really good use of our time. Especially after the new War for the Dawn. If you imagine an era in the North after the others are defeated, they're really not going to want to do violence for fun, right? They're like, okay, every living person that's an adult faced the others, or at least the damage they cause. Like, we do not need play fighting. We've faced actual death. We're good. So late 170s, early 180s, this is when it gets even trickier. Jonel marries Sansa and Edric marries Serena. You would expect Jonel marry, and this is part of why it's so weird, is Sansa's might be the older one, or might be the younger one. So you might have the older brother marrying the younger granddaughter, and the second brother marrying the older sister. So a granddaughter. It's so weird. You don't have to understand all the ins and outs of it. Just get that it's weird. You would expect Jonel and the younger girl to have more kids, because she's the younger girl. There's more opportunity to have kids. But no, Jonel and Sansa had no kids. Edric and Serena, however, lots of kids. Roughly, we'll say, starting in the early 180s. Cregan was born. Then Torrin, Arana, and Aragel. Around this time as well, probably is when that Brandon Stark, the next brother, the younger brother to Barthogan, had Lionel Snow with a woman named Willa Fenn. So a Crannig woman, potentially, or just a woman from the neck. And soon after that, he got properly married to Alice Stark and started having kids there as well. Rodwell Stark was born maybe around the same time, and then Baron Stark. Around the mid-late 180s is probably when Cregan finally passed. He was called the Old Man of the North, and, well, Old Man is tricky in Westeros because their standard for old is a lot lower than ours. Like, most people won't call someone in their 60s particularly old, but it's pretty old for Westeros. The old king was Jaehaerys, and he died in his 60s, so that's a great example. So I'm guessing Cregan at least made it to his 60s, but quite possibly made it to his 70s or 80s. Anyway, that would put his death roughly in the mid to late 180s, and that would put Jonel One Eye in charge of Winterfell, the first new Lord Stark of Winterfell since the early 120s, the late 120s. So 50 years or more of one guy ruling Winterfell. And though no one knew it at the time, they were going to have something like 7 or 8 Lord Starks over the next about 25 to 30 years. Just no stability whatsoever, no consistency. The opposite of Cregan's time, basically. But yeah, they couldn't have possibly seen that coming. Why would they have? Winterfell is eternal. It's been there for so long. They've never lost it. They've always gotten it back. Things have always worked out. Yeah. So Jonel One Eye ascends, again, we'll say the late 180s. And then in the early 190s, though, things start to change. Edric dies. He is, again, the second son from Cregan's third wife, Lenara. So this is Barthogan's older brother and Jonel's younger brother, the second brother of 4. And not long after that, presumably, Sansa dies. We know she dies, and probably around the same time. And this is when Serena's kids start to have other marriages. New alliances start to form. Arana married Lord Osric Umber, who was probably the son of Lord Jon or the brother of Lord Jon. Probably the brother, actually, because Jon Umber didn't have kids with his Stark wife. So he's probably just the next one. Lord Osric is described by George R. Martin as loyal. So that is important. Loyal to who? Probably to Winterfell. I mean, that's generally what it means, right? That's who they're supposed to be loyal to. That's the default. No reason to suspect otherwise. So we'll go with that. So that's pretty interesting that this family's getting smaller. All of a sudden, there was all these opportunities, all these marriages, and then some really important people die. Not just Cregan, but Sansa and Edric, and more marriages start to happen. Then a big global event happens. 196, the first Blackfire Rebellion. As best as we know, the Starks weren't terribly involved. And that's interesting because, well, we had just got through saying how they had that period of closeness where Aegon III and Cregan Stark were pretty close and good friends and all that. And then that fell off, because Aegon dies. And as we said, Daeron and Baelor, and now we have the next Daeron, and it's just many more kings have passed. So much time has passed. But the Blackfire Rebellion is interesting, not just because the Starks may not have participated in it, but because of the why they didn't participate in it. It might be because of this. It might be because of so much embroiling. Last time they got involved, look what happened. It didn't go very well. Maybe they should just stick to their own problems. And as we're seeing, as we're discussing, they had quite a few. There were things going on. There was instability at Winterfell. We are told, without detail, that this was a troublesome era. Well, we do have some detail. But there's a lot more detail that we're not given. We know that the troubles go beyond what we know. So, in the late 190s, after the Blackfire Rebellion, we have probably another betrothal. Well, it definitely happened. It may have happened before the Blackfire Rebellion. This is Aragel, another daughter of Serena Stark with Edric Stark. And this marriage is Aragel to Lord Robard Serwyn. Another person that George R. Martin calls loyal. So that's telling that both of these two daughters of Serena and Edric were to loyal lords. So this may be a sign of rewarding loyalty rather than shoring up someone that you already think is loyal. Like if they're already loyal to you, you might not need to do the marriage alliance because you might want to say, hey, let's bring someone else into the fold that's only half loyal. A marriage alliance will make them fully loyal. We can already count on these loyal Umbers and Serwins, but that's not what they did. They gave the marriages to the previously already established loyal lords. At least that's how I interpret it. So Jonel remarries. He's like, I still don't have any kids. I never had any kids with Sansa. I want to have kids. He marries Robin Riswell. The Riswells are another very powerful house in the north. And it's the first mention through all of this of anyone in the western part of the north. We've heard a lot about. We've heard Manderley. We've heard about Karstark. We've heard about Umber, of course. But the houses on over to the west haven't been mentioned. Mormont hasn't been mentioned. Well, at least except for that they're large people. But yeah, so Barrow-ton and the Dustons and the Riswells hadn't come up at all. So here they are. This might be another attempt to bring an important house into the fold after some of these other things weren't working out. And the Serwins, that's really important because the Serwins are the most proximate to Winterfell. They're the closest house to Winterfell. Their castle is like a day and a half away. That's something that marks them as very loyal to the Starks because of that proximity. They are very dependable. There's as far as we know, that's kind of an unbroken line of loyalty. They're like the Cassells or something like that, where they're basically a house whose entire existence depends on their loyalty to House Stark. But what happens if House Stark is split, right? Which half of the house do you stay loyal to? It's not always so simple. So Jonel wasn't able to have children. He was still trying. As we said, he remarried to Robin Riswell, but the pressure would have been off a bit. You know, maybe this is also why Barth never married, because by then Edric and Serena had a lot of kids, and Brandon and Alice Karstark had as well. There were a lot of Stark kids now. They went from no sons or one son to a bunch. So they solved that problem, but they may have overshot because too many Starks might be a bigger problem than too few Starks, that's certainly what happened with the Targaryens, isn't it? It sure did. So moving forward, Jonel dies in the early 200s, most likely. Black Sword ascends. Barthogan is now Lord of Winterfell. I'm going to guess it was about the year 204, 205-ish, which puts him, our guess was that he was born in 164, so he would have already been about 40 years old at this time. So not a young man at all. And that's a difference from what I had said before. If attentive listeners will recall some of my takes on the guesses of some of these characters' ages in the Cregan episode, I've changed my mind. I think I undershot most of them. Most of these Starks were older than I thought. And the mistake I made was not giving enough leeway for the marriages of Rickon's daughters, Serena and Sansa, to their own uncles. Uncles who were probably younger than them, or at least the same age. It's, again, just the weirdness of this all. Yeah, you got Jonel and Edric marrying their own nieces who were probably older than them. Yep, what did I say? Weird marriages, right? This is not Stark-like from what we know about the Starks, yeah? I mean, we're introduced to Starks that weren't even marrying in the north. Like Ned married Catelyn Tully. She's a Riverlander. Let alone marrying other Starks, right? So Rodwell and Baragon, who are, again, Barthogan's nephews through his younger brother, Brandon, they probably get married around this time. Baragon Stark ended up having 7 children with his wife, Laura Royce. Yeah, bring a Royce into the mix, another outside the North type character, and that's interesting in and of itself. It certainly implies a potential add-on to the factionalism situation. You're bringing in a major outside power that might be able to supply support, threats. Just don't mess with us. We've got the Vale on our side. Or if it actually came to blows, then you've got maybe Vale Knights, or at least Vale gold flowing in to do some good for whatever side is receiving it, which in this case would be the Baron Brandon faction of Starks. Around 206 is when Barth dies in Skagos. And this is where we'll get into a lot greater detail once we're done with this little timeline section, which I'm calling little. It's not very little, is it? This is a lengthy section, but I think it's a lot of fun. So we'll basically cut it off there. minus, I'm going to give you a couple of dates that happened just after this to show you what this kicked off. Because as I said at the intro, Barthogan's death seems to kick off the reign of, hey, it isn't just an idea that the Starks are weak. Let's prove the Starks are weak and do something about it. We had maybe 20 to 30 years of people going, the Starks might be not as strong as they used to be, but no one actually tested them. Baragan Blacksword is when that first test came, and he died, and more tests came from other threats. Let's go through that real quick. Brandon Stark takes over after Barthogan. Doesn't last very long either. Rodwell Stark takes over for his father, Brandon. Doesn't last very long either. We're talking 2-3 years at most for either of these guys. Rodwell's younger brother, Baron, takes over. Baron, who I just said had 7 children. Baron, we've heard of before. Baron is dying at the beginning of the She-Wolves of Winterfell, which was originally planned to be the 4th Dunk and Egg story. Now it looks like it's going to be the 5th or the 6th, which might change the timeline slightly. Originally, we had Baron dying around the year 212 or 213. Maybe we should push that a year, but 1 year's not a big deal for our purposes here. Either way, he's killed trying to push the Ironborn out of the north. Dagon Greyjoy's Ironborn. Dagon Greyjoy was active for perhaps the better part of a decade, raiding up and down the West Coast, mostly harassing the Starks and Lannisters. The Starks and Lannisters worked together against Dagon and still couldn't stop him. It took the intervention of the throne under Bloodraven to stop him under circumstances that are still mysterious to us. But you can see the weakness in the north that enabled Dagon Greyjoy to do this. If we still had a strong leader like Cregan in the north, would Dagon have even tried? Maybe. We don't know. But I doubt he would have had the success he had if they had had stronger, more consistent leadership. And only about 10 to 12 to 13 years later, King Beyond the Wall, Raymond Redbeard, a name that should be familiar to all y'all, comes over the wall and does battle with Stark-led forces without the Night's Watch. The Night's Watch was late. Under Sleepy Jack was the Lord Commander. But with the support of Lord Harmond Umber. So you have Lord Willem Stark with Lord Harmond Umber fighting against King Beyond the Wall, Raymond Redbeard. What happens? Lord William Stark is slain and beheaded at the Battle of Long Lake. Yes, he was defeated and killed, and there was time enough to parade his head around on a pole. It wasn't like a touch and go kind of thing. They had time to do that. Maybe not a lot of time, because Willem's younger brother, Artos the Implacable, avenged him and killed Raymond personally. So he didn't have much time to enjoy that head on a pole before his own head ended up on a pole, or at least at the mercy of whatever Artos wanted to do with it. Willem's very young son, Edwyle, would eventually inherit with Artos as regent, presumably. Edwyle was Ned's grandfather, so that gets us pretty close to the current timeline. But of course, that's beyond our story, because Barthogan died about 20 years prior to that Battle of Long Lake. But again, the point was to show how the Skagosi Rebellion was the first of several problems that showed the weakness of Winterfell for the next 20 to 30 years following it. So you have a lot of Starks dying in short succession for reasons unknown, and then a lot of Starks dying in short succession for reasons of violence, of invasions, from beyond the wall, from the Iron Islands, and from their own territory of Skagos. Skagos was part of the North. Now, think about this. The implied weakness here. The Starks and their allies, even without the Night's Watch's help, they should be able to handle an army of the Free Folk, given how undisciplined and technologically inferior the Free Folk are. Look what Stannis did to them! With a very small army.
Hey, the free folk advocate here will stand up for them. No, you're probably right.
Yeah. I mean, they were, to be fair, they were caught off guard. It was a surprise. It was an ambush by Stannis, and Melisandre was blowing up eagles out of the sky with her powers. But still, he only had like 300 knights. It was a very small. He had 1,500 men total, and he just wrecked them. So the point is, Winterfell was repeatedly and sorely tested in this era, and they came up short frequently. It's like, Willem Stark was killed in battle against the Free Folk. Barth Blackword was killed in battle against the Skags. Like, that's a big deal. Like, what's going on here? And again, we have other Starks who died maybe to violence. All those Starks died in short succession. Are we supposed to believe all of them just like had heart attacks or something or got sick? There was probably some other deaths to violence that would, spice up the situation even more. So again, that's why Barth is important, because he seems to be the apex of this. He's when this turned from theoretical to, the Starks really are weak. It was probably unstable when he took over, but there hadn't been rebellions as far as we know. So that's really important. And this toll would be taken repeatedly by all these invasions, like the loss of so many thousands of men. I mean, one war weakens you for the next war. And we hear that thousands of men were killed on Skagos. That's a lot. We'll get to that after our break. Now, interestingly, the man who broke the cycle was, I said, Artos the Implacable. He's the one who beat the free folk, and then we don't hear about much trouble after that for a while. He was not a Lord of Winterfell. He was a second son, and did get his own statue, though. But that's the end of the timeline. Let's go back to a little bit at the beginning and a little more of Cregan's legacy and his descendants. But first, let us briefly talk about some other things. Our friends over at the show Hit Points Not Required. That's our good friend Chuck Lazarow. Chuck Laz, Destroyer of Evil, our good friend with the nickname Nightblood. Do you like Critical Role and other similar TTRPG channels? They are dedicated to all things TTRPG. That is Hit Points Not Required. They have a mixture of actual play streams and chatting centered around adding more role play into RPGs. They have some really nice graphics. Their live stream looks really nice. It's almost everything Chuck does looks really nice. So that's to be expected. In March 2025, they did Point of Pride, which I believe was a charity, a pride charity. Is that right? For trans folks. Okay, cool. And December 24 and January 2025, they did the Atlanta Mission. So a lot of charity stuff. They're being a supporter of their channel is also supporting the many charitable endeavors that they're engaged in. They're at twitch.tv, Hit Points Not Required, and you can catch the replays on YouTube at Hit Points Not Required. I wanted to also let you all know that our friends on Patreon, well, those of you who support us on Patreon, many of you participated in Topics Moot 2025, where 16 episodes were chosen out of a list of, 100 or so. We had a whole lot of polls, and typically what we did was we have one poll on Monday and then another on Wednesday, and the top 3 finishers from each of those polls would face off on a Friday poll. So 6 different episodes that made the finals would then face off, and the top 3 would win. So we had 16 episodes chosen, and those are the Winterfell murders, meaning Little Walder and Yellow Dick and all those killings that happened while the Boltons and Freys and Manderleys are there. My Champion is Fire, which was already out. That's the killing of Rickard and Brandon by Aerys. The killing of Kevin Lannister by Varys. We've already released that one too. The 4th one chosen was this one, Barth Blackword. Yay, so we're doing that right now. Also to come, Benjen Stark, a full deep dive on First Ranger Benjen Stark. Daenys the Dreamer, the prophet and Targaryen who is responsible for them being the only Dragon Rider family to survive the Doom. Darkstar dominated a poll and gets a deep dive of his own alongside Daenys and Benjen and Barth. The Brotherhood Without Banners gets an episode this year. So does House Frey. And also shout out to my Twitch channel, twitch.tv History of Westeros, where we are currently playing House Frey. And that's a lot of fun. It's fun to play a villainous house. The 10th episode chosen in Topics Moot was Norse Myth and the Long Night. This gets into one of our historical deep dives where new archaeological evidence, and what I mean by new, meaning in the last 10 to 15 years, so pretty new as far as archaeology goes, purports to tell why so much of Norse myth is the way it is, like how it relates to things that were really happening in the real world at the time, and how that relates to potential theories about the Long Night and volcanic activity and starvation and the kinds of things that societies do when things are that bad. So this should be really interesting, backed by a lot of real-world research. That one will probably be later in the year because, well, it involves a lot of real-world research that I need to refresh myself on and dive deeper into. So in other words, things outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. A Tale of Three City-States is also a historical deep dive. It is basically the Game of Thrones of ancient Greece. Athens, Sparta, and Thebes are the three city-states in question here, and I'm a huge fan of that time period, and studying that time period, being a fan of it, has shown me just how much Game of Thrones is in there, and y'all, I think, will enjoy it very much later in the year. Pretenders and Imposters is another one that was chosen. That is basically the idea of people like, Fagon, or people who either are or might be who they purport to be, in both within the world and outside. It's sort of a follow-up to the Wars of the Roses episode because there were pretenders and imposters in the wake of the Wars of the Roses. So that is where George got some of his inspiration. But of course, it's a thing all over history. There's been false claims, and the term pretender doesn't mean you are pretending to be somebody, but it relates to the conceptually. So it's confusing. But anyway, that'll be a fun episode. The Prophecies of Patchface was a very popular choice, and that will be an episode this year. Deep dive into a man who drowned. That's appropriate. Deep dive, yeah. So what's his deal? His prophecies are some of the weirdest, and that is fun. The Ghost of Highheart, another prophet. Her prophecies are a lot more straightforward, but she's not. And she might still have a role to play, which is interesting as well. Same as Patchface while we're at it. A Question of Quaithe, a very A Song of Ice and Fire type title, and another prophet who we are very curious about, and y'all voted more so than others. And finally, the 16th topic, though not necessarily the order these will be made. Who knows the Song of Ice and Fire? As in, who knows that prophecy in world, or who did know it? Who are different characters throughout the years that have been aware of that prophecy, and what have they done with it? All right. Let's get back to it here. So Winterfell, as we said, Winterfell went from very stable under Cregan Stark with his 45 to 60 years and 3 marriages to very unstable. The North learned a lot from the Dance of the Dragons, though it didn't suffer a lot of casualties to its nobles. There were a lot of people killed. A lot of the Winter's wolves died, but these were grizzled warriors, graybeards. These weren't like these aren't like the lords of houses and scions of noble houses. These were people who didn't stand to inherit. That's part of why they're out there fighting in the first place. House Stark didn't suffer any deaths during the dance, for example. So Cregan helped end the dance with the Hour of the Wolf, or perhaps his actions did less to end it and more to dispense justice to those who started it. That may be more accurate. Either way, the damage was done, and it's best to make sure that doesn't happen again. And he's so familiar with this. He had to wrest power from his own uncle when he came of age. So he's very familiar with people usurping thrones and seats from each other. It happened to him. It happened to the Iron Throne. Yeah, it's a lifetime full of experience. So he had to see these things coming when he made the arrangements he did. When he married his own granddaughter to his own son, this was very likely to prevent outcomes like the ones that he lived through. He didn't want to have a Dance of the Direwolves. Maybe things looked good to him when he died. Maybe he thought, hey, I'm leaving things in a good place. I've shored up the family. I've prevented a lot of the things that could go wrong. He might have died thinking, all right, everything's fine. But he was wrong, because it didn't stay fine. It turned sour very quickly. And perhaps he did see that. Maybe when he died, he was like, my work is unfinished. I don't like how I'm leaving things. Yeah. George likes that archetype, Nina says, and I think I agree with her here. It's a pattern that she's noticed, which is that the good man who ultimately fails and leaves his land in disarray, right? He has good intentions, but those good intentions don't work out. It's not necessarily their fault that they didn't work out, but they didn't work out. Jaehaerys the First, good example. Aegon the Fifth, Aegon the Unlikely, who we've already likened to Barth Blackword here. Cregan could be a good example of that. Ned Stark. To a lesser extent, someone like Viserys the First, who wasn't a good king, but as far as Westeros goes, it's hard to call him a bad man compared to other people, and so he's a variation on that theme, maybe not quite as good of a man, but certainly not a villain, and things went way worse than his intent. So let's get some more historical context, some more historical takes from Cregan and what this set up here. Let's get a quote from The World of Ice and Fire. Here it is.
After the Dance of the Dragons, the Starks were more overtly loyal to the Targaryens than previously. Indeed, Lord Cregan Stark's son and heir fought beneath the Targaryen banner when the young dragons sought to conquer Dorne. Rickon Stark fought bravely, his deeds sometimes reported by King Daeron in his conquest of Dorne, and Rickon's death outside of Sunspear in one of the final battles was lamented in the north for years to come because of the troubles that dogged the reigns of his half-brothers.
Nina points out a glaring error in that quote. Instead of dogged the reigns of his half-brothers, did you say wolved the reigns of his half? I mean, come on, dire-wolved? Yeah, come on, George. Come on. Yeah, so as we said before, Rickon had those two daughters, Serena and Sansa, and we've discussed their marriages and children and all that. But it reminds me of this great one-liner from Tywin talking about what's going to happen to Sansa. They want to control Sansa, and they're talking about all the different outcomes. He says, send her north, and she will be wed to some Manderly or Umber before the moon turns. There you go. Serena was married to an Umber, and this Sansa was married to a Manderly. So it's exactly right. Tywin was nailed it. And this brings us back, these particular marriages brings us back to an old political strategy, one that has been present ever since the founding of White Harbor about 1,000 years ago. And the strategy is one, it's a term that I've coined, but I think it's present and very visible. So if you have a video feed, or you can switch it on briefly, take a look at this. The strategy is called Box in the Dreadfort. Make sure Umber and Manderly and or Karstark are on your side, and the Dreadfort is boxed in by the coast and White Harbor and Winterfell and those other houses. They are trapped. It's harder for them to do anything, and they can't reach out for alliances. It keeps them in check. That said, the Dreadfort plays little to no role in this story at all. They were kept in check in this era. It wasn't their time. Their time was much later when Roose Bolton came along. But those alliances are still very important. That Umber and Manderly are still very prominent, and Karstark as well, and they're obviously a huge part of this. Now, skipping ahead a little bit here, you can see why Cregan wanted to reduce the branches of House Stark to fewer because of what we just said, of course, what he lived through, seeing the multiple branches of House Targaryen. He's like, well, we don't want that to happen to us either. Yeah, we don't have dragons, but war is devastating enough without dragons, and we definitely want to avoid that. So to reduce the number of claimants, to reduce the number of factions, you unite these factions, and that's why we called the section The Wolf Must Have One Head. Think of the She-Wolves of Winterfell as a scenario and why it doesn't necessarily make sense if things are normal, which is this. Okay, remember the setup for the She-Wolves of Winterfell. Again, probably the 5th Dunk and Egg story, which of course means it's not out yet. The situation there is that Baragan Stark is slowly dying from a mortal wound he suffered at the hands of the Ironborn. And there was a succession crisis where 4 Stark widows were pushing their children above Baragon's eldest son? What? How? Why are they pushing their succession of Baragon's eldest? Because he was a boy, I presume. That's really the only thing that makes sense. His name was Donor Stark. He did end up inheriting. The succession crisis resulted in the person you would expect to inherit did inherit. The eldest son of the Lord Stark who just died. But why was it even a question? That's unusual. Why were they even not considering the eldest son of the Lord of Winterfell? Because that's how it goes 99.9% of the time. So why was it even a question? Why were somebody else even considered for that seat? The only reason I can possibly come up with is that he was too young and it was a time of trouble and you need a man in charge. You need an adult in charge if of Winterfell, not a regent, not a mother, a lord of adult age. And that's a reasonable argument, I think. It clearly didn't work, but the She-Wolves of Winterfell tells us the fact that this was even a question in the year 212 or 213 implies that it very well may have been a question 40 years prior as well, after the death of Cregan, when there was so much uncertainty. So we don't have to know the answers to why it was a question, why it was possible for someone other than Donor Stark, the heir to Winterfell, to inherit Winterfell. But the fact that it was a question is unusual. That we don't have to know why this question existed to know that something's up. If things were fine, then it wouldn't have been a question at all. If things were normal, then, yep, Donor Stark inherits. Doesn't matter that he's not old enough yet. We'll take care of him until he comes of age, and then he inherits when he's 16. Go forward and prosper. That's normal. But why are they? And instead, what we have is these unusual marriages, these with high levels of consanguinity and threats to remove the legal heir based on tradition and law. So weird stuff happening here. I don't quite know what the deal is, and definitely questions, but very interesting questions. Nina points out, to be fair, that the current Alice Karstark was pursued for marriage by her own uncle, and she didn't complain about that part. She complained about the forcing of it all, but not the fact that it was incestuous. So yeah, maybe the North has a lesser threshold for incest, as we were indicating earlier. This is more examples of that. So to summarize some of this stuff before we move into the actual war and as much of Barth's reign as we can, which was very short, we have houses Umber, very involved. House Manderley, very involved. Now, why, of course? Because Serena's first marriage was to Lord Jon, and then her elder daughter, Arana, married Osric Umber. So that's seemingly an intent from Winterfell to keep the Umbers in the fold. And that's really important because of Skagos is the closest to Umber, to Last Hearth. So they may have already been suspicious. They may have already been worried about what was going to happen with this coming Skagosi Rebellion, and these marriages to House Umber might have just happened anyway, because marriages to House Umber happen. But they may have been of prime importance in this era because of the potential for rebellion from Skagos. Or, if we're going even farther, if we're taking this theory that Serena might have been a Cersei-ish figure, someone passed over and bitter about it, and not sitting back and taking it, trying to push power through her own male children, well, shoring up an alliance with the Umbers on her side, having a hand in that, taking control in that would be a big step. So that's pretty important. But we also have two Manderley Stark marriages in this era. So White Harbor was also very implied. We have Miriam Manderley marrying one of Brandon's children. That would be was that Baron? I forget. It doesn't matter. And then, of course, both Sansa and Serena are Manderley daughters with their Stark father. So Umber and Manderley don't get along that well, though. Do y'all remember Clash of Kings when Roderick Cassell basically had to get a little tough with them, and they didn't want to work together? He's like, y'all can cut some trees down and give them to the Manderleys, and they'll make some ships out of it, and that'll be really good for King Rob's war effort. And they're like, I don't want to work with the Manderleys. They're, lazy and corrupt and all, whatever they said, fat. He probably called them fat or something, but because that's what they would do. And the Umbers, but he's like, no, you're going to work with them, or King Rob will hear why. And they're like, all right, fine, we'll work with those stupid Manderleys. And the Manderleys, of course, are willing to work with them. We do later hear about these ships having been built. that Wyman Manderley has built a whole lot of a whole navy, basically, that's just sitting there waiting and is like, well, ready to unleash this. So, and that's important because they would have probably needed some ships. To invade Skagos, you need ships, and that's coming. And they may, again, we brought up House Royce as a potential being intentionally involved here. Their naval support may have also been involved. Maybe some support from the sisters. So, A very proud House Stark is facing a lot of things that they were not. Here's a comment from Dornish Dame. I just think of the Walders knowing exactly who was ahead of them in line of succession and who is not. Yeah, that's because when you're a Walder Frey, you what are you going to memorize all 40 people ahead of you in the exact order they're in? No, probably not. You're probably just going to know the few in front of you and the few behind you. That's a good point.
But I think Dornish Dame's point is that probably some people in House Stark were very aware when there were all these Starks.
That's a good point.
It's a lot of Starks.
That's a good point. Like when there's only a couple, you couldn't not know. But when there's a lot of Starks, it would be detailed, and the fact that most of them would know those details in itself is telling. Yeah, I agree with that. That's a great point. Yeah, like I love getting into these details. Like, what are the little things? What are the little conversations they would have? What are the like ins and outs of this existence?
Yeah, like imagine you're talking to your brother and he like lets slip like, oh yeah, I'm ninth in line, and you're like, oh,
I'll have the exact count,
yeah.
huh? You know? So that makes me 8th now. Like, we're at the funeral.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Maybe you don't say that at the funeral of your sister or your brother or whatever. Like, I'm number 8 now. Like, no, I moved into single digits. I was 10th in line. No, 9th. All right. Yeah, that is the kind of things that happen at a Frey funeral. Real quick, the idea of a name, Barth and Blacksword, it just reminds me of a couple of real world examples. There was a gentleman bandit in the 1800s named Black Bart. His real name was Charles Bolton. A Bolton, hey. And he was like, he wouldn't curse, you know, even as he was like robbing stage coaches and things like that. He wrote and he would rob, I think it was Wells Fargo, I think was his main target. I forget. Anyway, more famously, there was a Bartholomew Roberts, a Welshman who is the inspiration for the Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride, whom George has used conceptually as the Shrouded Lord, right? Many people have been the Dread Pirate Roberts. It's not, it's an identity that's passed on from different people, just like the Shrouded Lord. Bartholomew Roberts, his nickname was Black Bart. So instead of Barth Blacksword, we have Black Barth, right? The death of Black Bart marked the end of the golden age of Caribbean piracy. He was the most successful, arguably, of the Western pirates. He took over 400 vessels. He had an early variant of the skull and crossbones Jolly Roger flag with a large sword. Maybe these are accounts, not photos. He invented one of the early pirate codes. And he was killed at age 39 in the year 1722 by grape shot. Got him in the neck. Unlucky. Only 3 people were killed in that battle, and he was one of them. His body was thrown overboard because the pirates didn't want anyone parading his head around. They didn't want the law being like, we got him, we flown in. Like, nope, you won't have that body. Anyway, back to our subject. Barthogan's inheritance. As we said, Jonel One-Eye never had children with either of his wives, but did he actually name his brother Barth as the heir? Was he officially the heir, or just everybody knew he was because that's how the law works? And the reason we have to ask is because all sorts of traditions and norms were being broken in this era. Normally we'd say, well, no, he was the heir because he was the next eldest male in line. But we cannot assume that in this case because of all these other weird things that were happening, all these other spikes in unnatural, unusual behavior. So Jonel would have had a choice if he did name an heir. He would have had a similar, perhaps, choice to what his father Cregan had. Should I allow Serena to inherit? Should I take the chance of having a woman inherit, and maybe that destabilizes the North? Maybe people rebel against Winterfell over that, or maybe it goes well. And if it does go well, then that opens the door for more women to inherit, which potentially removes all sorts of awkward succession crises. I mean, I'm absolutely team just, if you're going to do monarchy, go eldest. Gender should be irrelevant because it removes so many of the confusing situations that turn into civil wars. If it's always the oldest, then it's simple. So that may have been an opportunity, but not one that they were actually able to get to pass. Serena may have been the de facto heir for a while, though, which is super interesting. And what did the North think of that? Was there panic? Was there maybe some people thought it might be a good thing? They're like, oh, that might be good for a change. Thinking about the North and how, old school they are, probably not. But if it was a time of peace, people might have been open to it. But it was not a time of peace. This brings me to a kind of a weird realization about incestuous marriages. If it's a little bit incestuous at all, the more confusing it is, the more incestuous it is. What makes things confusing is when they don't follow the normal lines of, well, you don't marry members of your own family. You marry everyone but that. Everyone else is on the table except them. It's the one place you don't marry. When you add that into the mix, it's like, well, there's no rules at all. So, again, this brings us back to Barth. Not married at all. Strange. Was it because there were enough Starks around, he just didn't feel necessary or didn't feel required? But then why didn't he get married when those other Starks weren't around in a time when there were very few Starks? So, yeah, it remains a big question. So, coming back to the possibility that he was large, a big man. There's nobody, right? Can you think of any other large people, any other large Starks? There's no examples. I have none. Not a single one. King Torrhen, Brandon the Builder, Ned, Rickard, Benjen, Brandon, any of the other Brandons, Robb, John. They're not that big. These are like maybe slightly large individuals, but none of them are huge. Large men in the North, again, that's usually Mormont, Umber, and Skagos. Skagos is known for big dudes, possibly Giant's blood or Ibonese blood or both. And those things could extend to House Umber, who are probably the largest mainland Northerners. So maybe Barth was that rare guy who was actually huge. And that itself has value. As a leader, as an imposing figure, if you're a big man, in a warrior culture, that might be something that balanced out what might have been a bad personality, right? And certainly balanced out lack of marriage alliances. Like Barth doesn't have in-laws that are in his corner because he has no in-laws, period. So that might have created an additional bit of instability. It's like, well, the Lord of Winterfell in this era doesn't have any other northern house he can lean on for extra help, whereas that normally is a thing. Like even Ned Stark had the Tullys to lean on a bit, and the list is endless. Like his elder brothers had Manderly and Umber potentially on their sides. So he doesn't have either of those. And those are huge things to not have. Manderly and Umber, like, yeah. Barthogan would have been growing up as a near contemporary to Daemon Blackfyre, too. We have to consider the impact of a living legend, a famous man with kind of a similar-ish name, Black Sword, Blackfyre. I mean, Blackfyre is a black sword. And ice. So he may have even, if he's a little younger than we thought, he might have been inspired by Daemon Blackfyre, because Daemon Blackfyre was born in the year 170. Right now, we think Barth was born in the mid-160s, so he would have actually been older than Daemon Blackfyre. But Daemon Blackfyre was still very much like a man's man, an ultimate fighter who had lots of children, and was Targaryen on both sides. So, like, had all the things going for him, a lot of things that other men would look up to. So yeah, it is kind of hard to miss that similarity with Black Sword and Blackfyre and warrior cultures and crossovers. But again, the North wasn't involved in the first Blackfyre Rebellion, so maybe we need to maintain some distance there. I don't know. It's tricky, right? It's very tricky. But maybe Barth Blacksword wanted to go fight in the Blackfyre, but maybe he did. Maybe there were a few Starks that fought. It just they didn't fight in an official capacity, but there were a few individuals that lent their swords to the cause. Maybe there weren't a lot of soldiers coming down, but a few individuals. Something like that, maybe. So, to summarize the state of the North that led to this war, the lack of Stark unification, the lack of strong leadership and or the lack of strength, possible depopulation from other events, was likely all part of the contributing factors, rather, for this bloodshed that followed. It's unlikely to be just one or two events. It could be a whole lot of things. It's very likely because what happened was very unusual. A certain savage and mysterious island took their shot at independence. Yes, Skagos tried to become independent while Winterfell was seemingly occupied and or weakened. But man, what a thing to try to do, to defeat Winterfell when you're Skagos. It was either very bold, very stupid, or there were some really major things going on in the north that gave them an unprecedented opportunity. Because on paper, it seems like such doomed failure. Again, I'll repeat my point from the beginning that some rebellions just look stupid on paper from the beginning. And that's just how it is sometimes, including in the real world. So that's always possible. But I don't think that's how George prefers to write it. I think he wants to have reasons and details and break this all down, even if he hasn't done so yet. So this result was the Skagosi Rebellion. Let's talk about that in detail, starting off with a quote.
Skagos has often been a source of trouble for the Starks, both as kings when they sought to conquer it, and as lords when they fought to keep its fealty. Indeed, as recently as the reign of King Daeron II Targaryen, Daeron the Good, the Isle rose up against the Lord of Winterfell, a rebellion that lasted years and claimed the lives of thousands of others, including that of Barthogan Stark, Lord of Winterfell, called Barth Blackword, before finally being put down.
Hey, spoiler alert. What are you doing? No, just kidding. So, keep in the back of your mind what this means for TWOW. We'll come back to that in a minute, because we're going to see Skagos, and this engagement, this war, this rebellion is some of the only things we know about Skagos. They, in the north, it's well known, and we've seen it, that the mountain clans, the hill tribes, are very loyal to the Starks. The Skagosi are not. They are mountainous and they are clannish, but they are not invested in House Stark like the other mountain clans are. So can we even count on them? Can Davos expect to go there, get Rickon and maybe even a small army and come back with that? Or will it go badly? Will he have to rescue Rickon from them? Is this like the way the Umber plot went on TV, where they actually were the betrayers? Are the Skagosi the betrayers in the book version of this? I don't really want to bring up the show too much, but every once in a while, it comes up. So if so, that could be how Rickon is killed. I really don't think Davos dies there, but maybe Rickon dies and that's who's responsible, or at least is there when it happens. Maybe they're not responsible, but they're part of the engagement. Maybe they're even on his side and he's killed anyway, or whatever. That's really quite serious though, isn't it? We talked about how Winterfell has been so dominant for so long, yet it took them years to defeat Skagos and thousands of lives. Okay. And of course, the Lord of Winterfell, our subject, Black Bart. What the heck? That's wild. I mean, so it proves what I was saying earlier, that the Skagosi had a good read on the situation. It wasn't good enough. They failed ultimately, but they weren't stupid in thinking that they had a chance. I don't think, because it looks like they maybe could have won this. They might have been able to draw out a stalemate, and in the long run, I suppose there's almost no way they could have held out. But the fact that they did this well, it really says a lot, because Winterfell should have been able to, in most circumstances, I think, shut it down a lot quicker, but that's not what happened. Now, if someone told me that only 10,000 people lived on Skagos, I would believe it. I'd be like, yeah, that sounds about right. I could see it being less. Like if someone gave me that as an over-under, he's like, are there more or less than 10,000 people on Skagos? I'd be like, oh, that's tough. I could easily see it being less. I could see it being more. I wouldn't think it's a lot more. So when you say thousands of people died in this war, I'm like, well, I bet most of them were not Skagosi. I bet it's really hard to invade their island. And they have such a strong home field advantage. That's a sports term that implies that your fans are on your side. The very terrain is on your side. It's like Dorne. Skagos is like the Dorne of the North, where invading armies have a hell of a time with the terrain and the people and the raids and the ambushes and the weather. I mean, you got tough-ass Northerners going up there going, whoa, this is more northern than I've ever seen. This is more northern than I thought the North could be. Skagos is like a microcosm of, like a time capsule of what the whole North used to be like in some ways. It's a land that time forgot. So, and there's another factor that makes the rebellion odd in the first place, which is that George has straight up said that Winterfell rules them, but nominally they're left alone. They just kind of get ignored and they just do their own thing. So they're risking a lot to be free when they're pretty much free already. Like, the Lord of Winterfell isn't out here demanding lots of troops and money from them. Mostly just demanding, like, fealty and don't raid the shoreline. They're mostly demanding that you not be violent towards everybody else. That's really what their loyalty, the extent of their loyalty, is required for. It's like, yeah, you know what, y'all do your own thing. Just don't attack anybody else. You know, just leave everybody else alone. But they didn't even do that. They're not even okay with that. So they must have been, again, this really shows they must have been really confident or really pissed off or some combination of the above, because the status quo for them was pretty good and they still risked everything for what looks like a slight improvement, you know, at best. But they're also kind of a backwater. George has called them that too. So they might be ignorant about how strong the rest of the North is. They might be really fired up about notions of honor and independence, and it might mean a lot to them. If so, why was this the only time that they ever rebelled that we know of? And in fact, we have a pretty good sense that it is the only rebellion of significance that ever came from Skagos, because, well, it's mentioned in context, and there was no mention of any other ones in the World of Ice and Fire. Now, they haven't been independent in probably 1,000 years or more. It's probably a different king, like a Brandon the Ninth, is the one who banned them from using the sea because they were raiders and they would do the false light stuff that the Sistermen do. And so they're basically like a combination of the Ironborn and the Sistermen, but bigger and hairier. So that, you can see why that would be a problem, something that needed to be handled or kept under control. But it's not like, hey, we need to go back to the old times when we were independent, you know, a few generations ago. No, this is a long, distant past. It's not like the old way where they're bringing something relatively recent in their history back into the fold. No, we're talking about something that's been gone for centuries. So the more you dig into the external details of this, the surrounding details, the more unusual it seems, which is fascinating to me. Let's also take a quick look or slash reminder of what kind of people we're dealing with. Because I keep saying they're more northern, it's a microcosm of the ancient North, but it's not quite that simple. There's maybe a cultural and ethnic divide here as well. The Skagosi are pretty fearsome people. Let's put it that way. Here it is from the World of Ice and Fire. Quote.
The Skagosi who reside there are little regarded by the other Northmen, who consider them little better than wildlings and name them Skags. The Skagosi call themselves the Stoneborn, referring to the fact that Skagos means stone in the old tongue. A huge, hairy, foul-smelling folk, some maesters believe the Skagosi to have a strong admixture of Ibbenese blood. Others suggest that they may be descended from giants, clad in skins and furs and untanned hides, and said to ride on unicorns. The Skagosi are the subject of many a dark rumor. It is claimed that they still offer human sacrifice to their werewoods, lure passing ships to destruction with false lights, and feed upon the flesh of men during winter.
Left out that last part when I was saying they're like Ironborn mixed with Sistermen because of the false lights and the raiding, but they also are cannibals. So yeah, it's just, woof. So you can see that's not all the North is like that. I mean, some of the North used to be like that, but most of the North didn't lure passing ships to destruction. Most of them aren't descended from the Ibbenese, and some of them might be descended from giants. But yeah, the clad in skins and furs, that's more like the free folk. That's, you know, that's a bridge to the ancient North of a different type. So yeah, it's pretty, they're different. The cultural ethnic divide significant. And of course, there's that isolation, right? They're on their own island in the far north. Not a lot of ships going back and forth between them and other places. Most of the trading that Skagosi do is them leaving to trade and come back. You know, people don't really stop there to trade. There's no ports. The reputation is bad. People don't want to go there. There's not much money to be made there. When Davos was coming up as a smuggler, the first captain he worked under was willing to do some really daring things. He went to trade with the free folk, which got him killed. He was beheaded for trading weapons to the free folk. He wasn't afraid of taking that chance, though. He was willing to do that. He thought that the rewards of trading with the free folk were worth the risk of running afoul of the Night's Watch. He did not take that risk for Skagos. Davos says even this guy, his nickname was the Blind Bastard, was afraid of Skagos. And in that quote, the Maesters aren't exactly kind in their writing about them. Huge, hairy, foul-smelling folk. Yeah. Okay. Is that a good thing for peaceful relations if the rest of the North is looking down on them like throwbacks, like low-tech bumpkins, you know, as yokels or whatever? Like, that's not good for peaceful relations when everyone looks down on you. So that might be part of the mix here. The being looked down on is not good for peace. And again, we go back to the sea power thing. Maybe they wanted to reestablish themselves as a sea power. It was Brandon the Ninth that banned them from doing that and kept them from raiding. Well, yeah, they might want to return to that. This might be the point. They're like, yeah, again, the whole point of fealty to Winterfell isn't what they give to Winterfell. It's what they don't do in terms of inflicting violence on the mainland. So that might be a big part of their motivation. They're like, hey, we want to have ships and go back to raiding and be who we were. We want to cut out our own destiny. We want to carve out our own lives and not be subject to Winterfell. Even though it's risky, even though we already get to mostly self-govern, we want all of it. We want it all for ourselves. Now, who would they be raiding if they were raiding with ships that they may or may not have anymore? And you got to think that this ban can't be absolute. You can't both not pay close attention to Skagos and enforce this total ban of shipping, right? There's probably some ships that they just, keep quiet about. That, and when they were in their raiding days, they would be raiding the Umbers and the Karstarks because that's who's close by. They don't have fancy sailing vessels. They can't go sail all the way halfway around the world or all the way to Essos or something to go raiding. No, they can only hit what's close by. So again, more echoes of Ironborn and Sistermen here. More of that. Now, they were probably never expert sailors like those folk, but whatever sailing skill they did have would be lost because they've been at least 2 centuries, probably a lot more, since the Starks had them bend the knee. Probably more like 1,000 years, like I said. So put all that together, you've got a very isolated people who don't have a lot of back and forth with the mainland, which is why they're isolated, which keeps them in a state of being backwards because they're not brought forward by traffic and commerce with the rest of the realm. They're looked down on. There's that cultural ethnic divide enforcing some of this. And consider that this was also an era where Dorne was recently incorporated into the kingdom after many years of fighting to maintain independence. And as I've already compared Dorne to Skagos in terms of how difficult it is to invade and tame, were they looking at themselves as similarly? Say, hey, if Dorne is independent or if they can have their independence, shouldn't we have ours? We're not even on the same continent. We have an island separating us. Why shouldn't we be independent? You can see the arguments there. Even if they aren't wise arguments, you can see them. Surely they didn't just send a letter, right? When the war began, they didn't just say, hey, we're independent now, deal with it. It almost certainly started with violence. A sneak attack on House Umber or Karstark, or maybe Manderley, or both, probably Umber or Karstark because they're the closest, maybe both again. I think that seems the most likely. Do as much damage as you can before they know you're doing damage. If you're going to strike at a greater foe, you need to hit them while they're weak. And the element of surprise would have been on the Skagosi's side for a little bit. So that early first few weeks or months or whatever would have been about accomplishing as much as possible and preparing for the inevitable kickback, the inevitable North getting its act together and saying, hey, what the hell are you doing, you rebellious Skagos Stoneborn, you unicorn-riding jerks? It would be slow for them to gather all that together. They'd have to form an army, get some ships to be able to even land on Skagos, get a battle plan together, figure out things like who's in charge, who's second in command, the things that Robb had to deal with when he was marching south to deal with Tywin. Just the petty things that lords fight over. Like, no, my guys march first, or my guys march here, or no, I get the place of honor. Just petty BS that nobles argue over that someone like Barth Blackword would have to manage. And what we can glean from everything we've said in this episode is it was probably a very difficult job for Barth Blackword, because there was so much factionalism from what we could tell in this era. And when there's a lot of factionalism, these things really come to a head, because no one wants the other faction to get even the slightest advantage or honor or notice or anything that they're not getting. It's like, oh, everything is, we can't let them get an inch on us. We have to, if they get one, we have to get two. It's very tense. It's very difficult. It's one of the things where you can't please everyone, but you need them. Winterfell by itself clearly wasn't strong enough to do these things alone. They needed their allies. They needed the rest of the North. So what would this look like for the Skagosi? Probably burning ships, probably destroying the things that would be a problem for them later in the war. Ships are going to be what invades them later. So they want to maybe destroy whatever ships they can to make that effort more difficult. Maybe hostages, maybe capturing some other nobles, something like that. That might keep a house or two on the sidelines. Like, yep, we're not going to war with you. Sorry, Lord Barth. They have my son captive. I can't take that risk. Go rescue my son, please, and then I'll give you some money. But I can't send my troops now, or they'll kill my son. So you can see there's a lot of things they could pull off. Raiding, sneak attacks, hostages, destroying military gear, destroying food. Like, what if it was about to be winter? That would be a very interesting timing if they timed their rebellion right around winter, when landing ships on Skagos would be just hellish and nightmarish and nearly impossible. It's already really hard to land ships there. All they have to do is defend the very few places where you can land a ship and just heavily defend those areas. And the Starks could just throw manpower at it, and just it'd be like trying to invade the Vale through the Bloody Gate. It would be extremely difficult. Bloody business that would be hellish for the soldiers involved. So that's, I think, what it would look like at the beginning. A lot of quick attacks, a lot of quick strikes, a lot of maybe hoping to keep sidelining some of the houses and doing everything they could to give themselves a lot of leeway, a lot of time. And winter may have been part of that. Like, if winter strikes and North is weak, and that gives us years potentially to reestablish ourselves as independent. And then after that, they get to rely on Skagos itself being so difficult, like the mountains and the terrain and the lack of food. And just imagine how hard it would be to go inland in Skagos and expect to be able to forage, and you're subject to ambushes and strange noises at night, and you don't want to get separated from the rest of the... Again, this is why I keep comparing it to Dorne, because that's what it would have been like for the invaders of... northern invaders going to Dorne. And of course, everyone's northern from the perspective of the Dornish. Conditions they weren't used to, just hard to sleep, animals you've never seen before. Instead of the extreme heat, you have the extreme cold, and it's extremely cold even for northerners who are used to the north. I mean, it's farther north, and if my guess about winter is right, then it would be as bad as it ever gets. It might have been the coldest some of these men had ever experienced. So yeah, as far as landing, oh God, it would be, let me go back to that briefly. You also have horrible storms and choppy water constantly outside Skagos. It's impossible nearly to land ships when that's being contested. It's difficult to land ships when they want you to come, but when they're trying to stop you, they can be shooting arrows, they can be doing cavalry charges with their unicorn riders, they can just... barricades can be built on the shore with, wooden spikes and sticks and all rocks. They can drop rocks into the harbor, make it really difficult to land ships, tear out the hulls, things like that. There's so many things that they can use to make it really hard for the Starks to invade them. And who's going to be really enthusiastic about this? Like, yeah, let's go get them. I don't know, maybe the Umbers, because that's just how they are. But the Stoneborn are downright frightening. What did we say before about them being huge and hairy? And this is a true survival of the fittest environment that these men live in on Skagos. Like, the weak people don't live here. Weak people die.
And it's like you're doing that for like what gain you? What prize do you get for that?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Yeah, well, I guess you could say I defeated the Skagosi. That's, some people would be like, those yokels. Like, no, they're freaking giants, man. They're hairy beasts with unicorn. Like, it's hard. And this is it's a time capsule. I said it already, but this is a place with like no Andal blood. Like, no Andals have ever made it to Skagos. They barely made it to the north. So yeah, they would look down on the north in their own way. Like, y'all are polluted with those Andals. So let's go back to the question of unicorn cavalry. Why do we actually know this exists? Why is it not just a rumor? Why is it not just a thing? How do we know for sure that unicorn cavalry is a thing? Let's go through the evidence, starting with Exhibit A. Quote.
It is also said that those seafarers brave enough to trade on Skagos have glimpsed the Stoneborn lords riding great, shaggy, horned beasts, monstrous mounts so sure-footed they have been known to climb the sides of mountains. A living example of such a creature, or even a skeleton, has long been sought for study, but none has ever been brought to Old Town.
I could see why you might think that quote actually suggests the opposite, that it kind of disproves the existence of the unicorn riders because of the lack of evidence, a skeleton or certainly a living specimen. But actually, it is a curious mystery why there hasn't been a skeleton, because we know for a fact that the answer is not because they don't exist. We do know they exist because of Exhibit B, John, A Dance with Dragons 1.
The white wolf raced through a black wood beneath a pale cliff as tall as the sky. The moon ran with him, slipping through a tangle of bare branches overhead across the starry sky. "Snow," the moon murmured. The wolf made no answer. Snow crunched beneath his paws. The wind sighed through the trees. Far off, he could hear his packmates calling to him, like to like. They were hunting, too. A wild rain lashed down upon his black brother as he tore at the flesh of an enormous goat, washing the blood from his side where the goat's long horn had raked him.
You can pretty easily tell that's a ghost because of the snow and the white wolf and the fact that he's running along the pale cliff as tall as the sky, which is the wall. There's other evidence too, but I don't need to sell you on that. The part that matters, of course, here is the black brother tearing at the flesh of an enormous goat, washing the blood from his side where the goat's long horn, singular, goat. We already think goat when you hear of being so sure-footed they can walk up the side of a mountain. So yes, they're probably not unicorns. They're probably one-horned goats. Same thing. I mean, you can call that a unicorn if you want. Unicorn just kind of means one horn, so yeah. So Snow, in that voice there, that's the raven trying to wake him, Mormont's raven. And so the moon's kind of a neat symbol there. We know Rickon's on Skagos. Though we don't actually, George is being tricky here, because when you first read that chapter, you don't know Rickon's on Skagos. You find that out way later in the book. So on reread, or if you listen to podcasts like this or whatever, you find out that Rickon's on Skagos. So that black brother, Shaggy Dog, tearing at the flesh of an enormous goat, is on Skagos with one horn. Yeah, that goat with one horn. So that's pretty definitive. Carl Karsnark says unicorns were real. They're actually just Angora sheep whose horn buds are surgically rotated such that the horns grow and twist into one horn. Circuses used to have them too. There's medieval manuscripts that depict them clearly, and they have billy goat beards, cloven feet, and a shaggy coat. They were put into flocks of real sheep to protect them from predators, and it worked well. Today I learned.
They also
That's
said
really neat.
cornus is Latin for horn.
Unicorn/unicorn. Yes. Nice. All right. Well, that makes sense. Yeah. Like something like horns are organic. So, and anything like that can be shaped. You can turn it and twist it. And yeah, that fits. That's neat. How about that? Thanks, Carl Karsnark. Figures we'd learn that from a Karsnark. They would know a lot about Skagos. So the early stage of this war would probably be the landing. The Skags would do everything they could to stop it, and the Starks would be dead set on achieving it. Once they have some sort of beachhead, once they are landed and defended and can hold a spot, then they can continue to bring ships to that spot and continue to bring more men and food and supplies. If they don't have a place on the mainland, they can't establish any sort of base. They can't have a safe place to bring more men and troops in. So it's vital to the war effort either way. It's both vital for the Skags to stop it and for the Starks to achieve it. Let's recall that there are 3 noble houses on Skagos: Crowell, Stain, and Magnar. Stain, Stane, not like, Bloodstain, but kind of makes you think of that. These would likely be the houses at the forefront of the defense. I can imagine there being, 3 safe landing spots for ships around the southern edge of Skagos, and each of these noble houses took charge of one of them. And I can imagine that these houses are located near these safe anchorages because it would be one of the things that you would want to build a castle or a keep near in the first place, because that's a source of power within the natural environment. A place where ships can land is something you would want to control as a lord. That's where taxes come through and trade goods, and that's where the power is, right? You build a castle in a place where it's going to achieve more power, where it defends things that have value, whether it's farmland, rivers, ports, etc. So I can kind of imagine that's like that. Now, of course, it's not a seafaring. They're not a seafaring race overall or people, so maybe some of these castles are pretty far inland. Which, if true, makes it all the more difficult for the Starks to achieve conquest, especially if they're high up in the mountains, which is likely. Just picture this. Let me go all Dan Carlin on y'all and try to imagine what it's like for a rank and file soldier recruited into a northern levy to go to Skagos and fight the Stoneborn. Imagine you're on some ship trying to land. Picture it like Hardhome, the ships and the fleeing of Hardhome and getting out of there during those storms and the others. Picture that, but you're going towards it instead of fleeing from it. Instead of the undead, you have the Skagosi, which, yeah, to be fair, that's one of the few ways I can make the Skagosi seem less fearsome, is to compare them to the undead. But it's still pretty darn scary, right? You're fighting all those weather conditions and these horrifying opponents. So there would be crashing and yelling, bitter cold, wind and waves, rain or snow, maybe both. You would be very cold. There's mortal danger here without considering the enemy. The weather alone can kill you. The terrain can kill you, slipping on the rocks. There's probably shadow cats and other dangerous animals. This is not just a survival of the fittest region for humans. It's a survival of the fittest region, period. And these are animals that survive in this hellish, cold region. They are strong, tough, and don't get regular meals. So there would be some familiar elements, perhaps, heart trees, but even these would be different. The heart trees might be carved differently. The faces might have unfamiliar expressions, more horrifying, more terrifying, more ancient. Maybe some mixed feelings. Maybe less than mixed if you're a White Harbor man and you still worship the Seven. You might be thinking, has anyone of Andal blood ever set foot on these shores with violence in mind? Maybe some traders have, but that's about it. But Andal's landing on Skagos with the intent to help conquer it might be unprecedented. Not the kind of thing you want to be thinking about, but these are kind of intrusive thoughts that might be coming as you are exiting that ship, heading towards your uncertain fate, which you might not have a lot of confidence in. To get deep into Skagos, to get to their control centers, their power, where the authority lies, the house, the seats, the keeps, you have to penetrate deep into this extremely difficult landscape that has no food. You have to bring your own food, which means more ships, which means supply lines, which means warriors spread thin because that's what the Skagosi will try to do. They will try to hit those supply lines. They will try to kill your food bringers, kill your hunters, kill the people who aren't actively engaged in fighting. Hit them when they're not looking. Guerrilla raid style. Again, doesn't this really sound like Dorne? Those of y'all who listen to our Conquest of Dorne episodes, and when I tried to put it from the perspective of the northern, like Knights from the Stormlands or from the Reach, and just how alien and horrific this land was. They might have gone in with bravado and then realized it was hellish, and like, what are we getting into? I don't think that would have been the case for the Northerners. I think the Northerners have a better idea of what they were getting into, and they knew it was going to be terrible. Skagos' reputation is a little maybe more closely linked to the rest of the North, and Dorne's separation from the rest of the Seven Kingdoms is larger. Those red mountains are a lot larger of a geographical barrier than the Bay of Seals or the Bay of Ice, whichever one it is, I forget. So yeah, even hardened Northerners could be overmatched by Skagos, I think. And anyone can be overmatched by starvation, right?
Can I tell you how funny it is for you to say that when you could literally look to over your shoulder?
Oh yeah, it's right here. Yeah.
It's on the other side.
Other side. Yeah. See, I don't even look in the right place. See? Which one is it? Seals. Yeah, it's the Bay of Seals. Yeah, we got the Bight here, the Bay of Seals up here. Which one's the Bay of Ice? Oh yeah, the Bay of Ice is the western one. The Bay of Seals is the eastern one. Yeah. Cool. All right. Good call, Shea. And shout out to Michael Klarfeld for those great maps. The other more scarier thing about the Skagos when we're comparing it to Dorne is the Dornish won't eat you. Right? They won't eat you afterwards. And because we hear two things about this. One is like we hear that they're just regular cannibals, that they sometimes resort to cannibalism when it gets really cold, but they also eat the hearts and livers of their defeated enemies. It's a very grim warrior culture kind of thing. If you know that about your enemy, if you know that's what they do to you, would you allow yourself to be captured? Would you take your own life if they were closing in around you and you knew their intent was to try to take you captive and eat you? I think I would kill myself. I don't think I would allow that to happen, especially if I was a warrior that was, tough enough to do that sort of thing, to be like, yes, I'm strong enough. I'm strong enough of mind to realize that I'm going to die, and I would rather die painlessly than roasted over some fire. Sacrifice to their heart trees.
Is there a reason you think they're doing it alive?
No, but you might be worried about that. Okay. You don't know. You're like, yeah, maybe they chop a piece off and eat that and save the rest for later. Slow, like do Vargo Hoat, kind of thing where they like leave him alive so the meat stays fresh. I think your imagination could get pretty wild there when you're thinking it's all about to end. So yeah, I think, you just don't want to face that. You don't want to be sacrificed to a heart tree or eaten or any of those things. You're like, I'm jumping into the sea. I don't want them to eat me at all. just let me go. Here we get another perspective on the Skagosi from none other than Sam Tarley. Quote,
"They lived in caves in grim mountain fastnesses," Sam had read, "and rode great shaggy unicorns to war." Skagos meant stone in the old tongue. The Skagosi named themselves the Stoneborn, but their fellow Northmen called them Skags and liked them little. Only 100 years ago, Skagos had risen in rebellion. Their revolt had taken years to quell and claimed the life of the Lord of Winterfell and hundreds of his sworn swords.
Similar but different information than we got before. The earlier quote said thousands of lives total. This was hundreds of sworn swords. It's just as telling. So these are warriors, not, villagers or things like that, which we assume there were casualties like that as well, but I think it was mostly armies clashing or soldiers clashing, warriors clashing. Hundreds of sworn swords. That's a lot, right? I mean, Winterfell's entire complement of sworn swords is probably in the hundreds. Like they don't carry standing armies around. Like this is not a feudal system. That's not how it works. When people aren't fighting, they're tending the land for the most part, with some exceptions, only the higher nobles generally. So that's a really big deal. With years of this war lasting, you can imagine that there were attempts to invade Skagos that then failed, and then they had to try again. And then once that they had a successful landing, it took a really long time to penetrate deep inland and defeat the Skagosi in their own keeps and to bring them to heel. And because it doesn't sound like they would be very willing, even like the Dornish, like you beat them and then they just bend the knee and say, psych, we didn't actually bend the knee. We just pretended. We came out of our caves and hit you in the stabbed you in the back. So the death of Barth Blackword in battle also tells you not only that, wow, the Skags were successful, they must have won several battles for the war to have lasted as long as it did, for the lives that were lost to have been accounted for. They would also have just been all the more motivated after this. Like, wow, we just lost the Lord of Winterfell in a war that started because we look weak. This makes us look weaker. Damn it, this is the opposite. If we beat the Skagosi handily, it would shut down the notion that we're weak. But the Lord of Winterfell just died in the war. That sends the opposite message. So it kind of tells me that they're going to try even harder. They're going to punish the Skagosi even harder to prove, hey, we're not weak. Right? That's when you can't overcome your enemies through strength, you punish them afterwards. You punish the ones who can't fight back as a show of strength. That's it's all too common in this world and other worlds, real worlds. It's just it's a deterrent. You say, look, yeah, this was really hard for us to shut down, but we did win, and we're going to punish the hell out of the survivors to keep you from doing it again. We're going to make sure you remember that. I do think they would have been very vicious to the Skagosi after the death of Barth, if they weren't already, because you gotta look strong in the face of the death of the Lord of Winterfell, and the only way to look strong in a war is by killing and winning. You have to make examples. You gotta probably parade some heads on pikes. The lords of Crowl and Stain and Magnar might have to be put on the gates of Winterfell to remind people, to prove that the Skagosi were defeated, that this is the price you pay for rejecting Winterfell's rule. There would have been other Starks with him, right? Would his younger brother Brandon, would he have been fighting along at his side, or would he have stayed back to make sure there's a Stark in Winterfell? Well, it wouldn't have to be Brandon because there's other Starks. We've got Serena and Edric's kids. We've got Cregan, Torrin, right? Those are the two older brothers. We've got Lionel Snow, Brandon's bastard son, and Brandon's trueborn children, Rodwell and Baron. Baron may have cut his teeth against the Skags before fighting against the Ironborn, right? Or maybe he was too young. We're not sure. Again, the ages are all over the place in terms of possibilities here, but it's unlikely that Barth Blackword was the only Stark to fight in this war, and thus it may have been a case of Brandon being right there when his brother fell and just battlefield promotion to Lord of Winterfell. All of a sudden, just, well, there's an arrow in my brother's throat or a unicorn horn in his chest. Pick up ice. Okay, I can't wield this, but pick it up and keep going, right? Something like that. And just picture that, though. This tall, imposing Stark fighting with a great sword, surrounded by his sworn swords, unicorn horns flashing. I don't know that Cregan would be, not Cregan. I don't know that Barth would be on a horse because they're having to land from the sea. I don't know if they brought horses even with them. I don't know if was part of their battle plan or not. Either way, imagine him out front, whipping that sword around. Many people will be able to see it, especially if he's a big guy, that sword going up and down, and all of a sudden it just doesn't come back up again. It falls, it stays down, and that's a grim feeling if you're following the Lord of Winterfell into battle and all of a sudden he's gone. Uh-oh. It may have been one of his entire armies might have been wiped out at the same time. It might have been like oops, like I said earlier, an arrow to the throat or just an accidental kind of thing, or it may have been an ambush overwhelming. There's a lot of ways this guy could have died, It's just like the list of ways to die in war is immense. He could have drowned trying to get off the ship there, and or since we're talking about Dorne, maybe they agreed to a parlay and then cheated, and we're like, we're not. This isn't a parlay. We're going to ambush you. Something like that. Besides other potential Starks, there would have been the Cassells, Jory Cassell, Martin Cassell, people who that house has been loyal to the Starks for countless generations. Any Cassells capable of fighting would have been there at Barth's side, and they may have seen it as a great dishonor that he fell while they were with him. They may have died at his side. Like I said, they may have died with him. It may have been like a Daeron, the young dragon, where at the parlay or not, his Kingsguard were slain for the most part, minus one who was captured. No, or was it two? Anyway, Aemon was definitely captured. I think one other one surrendered. But regardless, the point stands either way. That there's a lot of ways for him to fall, and no matter which one of them it is, it's very embarrassing for the North. It's very embarrassing for his sworn swords. It's very embarrassing for House Stark. It's just embarrassing. It looks weak. Maybe he fell trying to take one of the major seats, Deep Down, Driftwood Hall, or King's House. Those are the three seats of Crowell, Stain, and Magnar. I don't think they're grand stone fortresses, but they could be built into the side of a mountain. They might have caves. They might be connected to they might be difficult despite not having modern technology. And they would certainly be fought bitterly over. They'd certainly be held by an opponent that knew they couldn't expect to win quarter. This was an all or nothing kind of engagement, especially after the death of Barth Blackword, I think. So after his death, whatever the circumstances were, Brandon took over, and as I said, all current Starks descend from this Brandon. So unless Barth died during the final battle or, something that was really close to the end of the war, it would have to be Brandon that carried the flag to the end and finished the war off. Unless his vassals did it for him. You never know. Maybe this Brandon just wasn't a war guy. But either way, I repeat that there would have been extra pressure to win decisively to show that this isn't worth it to anyone else. No one else should be thinking rebellion because, look, you failed. Yeah, you got close, but you failed. That lesson would not be learned by the Ironborn and by Raymond Redbeard. Indeed, this remains, as we said at the beginning, the start of a lot of uprisings and problems in the North. Remember as well that I said Brandon didn't last very long after Barth, nor did his eldest Rodwell. Neither of them, or rather either of them, could have died to the Great Spring Sickness, which was in 209. And that could have been a factor in reducing the overall population of the North as well. That could have made them weaker. First you lose thousands of men in the Skagosi Rebellion. Then the Great Spring Sickness happens. Then Dagon Greyjoy's Ironborn come, and then you have the She-Wolves of Winterfell incident. So yeah, and then you have the Battle of Long Lake at 226 with Raymond Redbeard. So the North was probably very low population, given all these things that happened. Outro. Watch out, Davos. As little as we know about Skagos, what we do know is a combination of exciting and terrifying. It remains, like we said, a bit of a time capsule, but it's a time capsule to a fascinating, interesting time. The North, the old North, the ancient North, isolated and northern by nature, and I do mean nature. It has a mystical and dangerous quality to it. And perhaps extra dangerous to a Southerner, and consider that we are going to see it through the eyes of a Southerner. Our POV in Skagos is going to be Davos. Not Rickon, not John or someone else in the North. That's a device we've seen George use in the beginning. Catelyn was our first insight into a lot of the strangeness of the North because she's not from there. All the strangeness from Bran's eyes, from Ned's eyes, from Jon, it's not as strange to them because it's what they grew up with. To Catelyn's the outsider in the North, and so her perspective is really important to showing us the strangeness of the place from an outsider's perspective. We're going to get that through Davos on Skagos, and that's awesome. So
I keep hearing what you said from, I think it was Valerie Reedus.
Yeah.
Pack your bagos for Skagos, Davos. Yeah. I keep hearing that for some reason.
I know. Me too, honestly. Yeah. Not to toot my own joke, but yes. I was proud of myself for that one. So we have like other characters going north, which is things like George is setting this up for a lot of POVs to be showing us a lot of northern things through non-northern eyes. Because we already had Catelyn, and she's kind of not in the picture in terms of that anymore. Sam has gone north and then gone back south. He may go back north again. But we also have Asha and Melisandre, who has a lot of insight into the supernatural. So Asha, Melisandre, Davos, maybe Sam comes back. It's almost as if a lot of southern POV characters are headed north. Okay, actually, scratch the almost. A lot of southern POV characters are headed north or are already there. It's already, Anyway, the Stoneborn are just too badass and fun, and they're like Chekhov's cool side race from the north. They have to be important. They got to be part of the battle for the Dawn or a problem in the north uniting something. I don't know exactly what, but my point stands. They are too cool to be left out. Davos is going to get us there. We're going to see a lot of echoes of what we just talked about with Barth Blackword and the types of dangers that they present, or the type of an ally they can be, or both. And that's great. But we also will get, by filling in these things through A Song of Ice and Fire, we will also be backfilling a lot of this. We'll also learn more about the history of House Stark, which is a grand goal that we can only inch further forward on, because we'll never get it all. We'll never get all the history of House Stark. That's ridiculous. 8,000 plus years of history is never going to happen. But characters like Barth Blackword are a big reason why we do want more, why we want to get as much as we can get. Even if it's only inches, we want it. Trivia question. Who said the line, "Only heart trees ever see half of what they do on Skagos"? Roose Bolton said that one. Yes, he did. None other than Roose Bolton. I said there wouldn't be much Dreadfort in this one, but I had to get a little in there. A little Bolton snuck in there. That's right. That is our episode, my friends. I hope you enjoyed this northern deep dive into an old ancient place and Winterfell and the succession crises and a lot of characters that we want to know more about, but we already know quite a bit about. If you want to stay immersed, check out our Hardhome episode or our Skagos episode. We have one. It's really old, but it talks about a lot of these things in a different light and some new other things as well. Hour of the Wolf, a Cregan Stark episode focused on him, rather, and then another one, actual Lord Cregan Stark, focused on his whole life and not just the Hour of the Wolf. Hour of the Wolf being a separate incident that's important within his life. We have 2 scripted episodes on House Manderly. We have an episode on House Karstark. Honestly, I couldn't list all the ones that this one touched on. There's a lot. And of course, Ashay even mentioned Valar Reedus, where we cover quite a lot of northern stuff as well. So really, you have a lot of options, my friends, and I do appreciate you sticking with us. We have so much more to do. As you heard during the halfway point of this episode, we have a lot of great episodes coming this year, and a lot more. That is not the full list. It's only the full list of topics, Moot. We have some that we're coming up with on our own. We've always got more ideas. And of course, later this year, there'll be a TV season. So 2025 is continuing to shape up great. We'll keep it going. And one of the best ways you can keep it going and maximize your enjoyment is to Valar Rereadus. Thanks to Nina. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld. Thanks to Joey. And thanks to you all. Again, Valar Rereadus.